Alright, so last year I made a very long video going over the animated shows that I saw in 2020, which ended up being 45 of them. And this year I'm going to be doing a similar thing, although it is slightly less. I am going to be going over the 36 shows I saw this year. So this is going to be a long video, and I don't have a script for this. I'm just going off some notes I have. So this will probably be a little bit freeform, and I might stumble over my words every now and then. That's okay. So yeah. Last year I also tried originally to, have some sort of visual component. So I originally had trailer footage edited in, but YouTube copyright was like no, and basically the video ended up being blocked like 12 times over in everywhere. So I had to edit all of that out. So I'm not even gonna try this time. Oh well, just I don't know, just put this on a tab and speed it up a little bit or something, and do something else. I don't know, whatever. Um, but yeah, I'm going to be going over the 23, no, 30, why did I say 23? What is wrong with me? Stumbling over my words. The 36 animated shows that I have seen this year. Again, I'm going to include some seasons of shows that I've already talked about, so some new seasons, we'll at least talk about the new seasons. I'll be talking about some shows that just started airing this year, and also some older shows that I also happened to watch this year. Last year, I focused on watching a fair amount of shows from the 2010s. This year, I picked out some shows from the 2000s that I hadn't seen yet. So, moving back in time a little bit, well, there's definitely a lot more that I haven't seen as well to mention. I will say, in terms of overall comparison to last year, I do think the quality is a little bit more consistent from what I watched. I have less things that were like super highly rated, but also less things that were not rated to rated fairly lowly. So most of what I'm going to be talking about in this, I'm giving ultimately a 7 or an 8. So there's not too much in either direction from there. Which I guess I should go over my rating system for people who don't remember or just kind of forgot, haven't checked out the video from the Movie Mondays that we did for these. For me, a neutral is a 5. And so neutral is like, I watched it, roughly equal amounts of good things, equal amounts of bad things. My overall view of it is just sort of, it existed, whatever, right? That's a 5. A 6 is like overall positive, but there's definitely some major negative things that hold it back for me from like really liking it, but I can't say it was a negative experience. So that would be a 6. A 7 is sort of like standard good, where it's like you watch and like, yeah, decent, solid, okay, and you had a decent time. But don't have any particular attachment to it. And I wouldn't even necessarily really say like, oh yeah, you should go out and watch it. It was more just like, I watched it, didn't dislike it, didn't feel like a waste of my time. It worked. Okay. An 8 is definitely, of course, a step above that. 8 is where I would definitely start recommending for other people to watch it, whatever I'm talking about. Again, there could still be some issues which might hold it back from being even higher, or I just don't think it necessarily hits, like, super well good emotional highs all the time and, anything from there. But definitely once you get to 8 territory, that's when I would say that I would definitely recommending this to other people. And then a 9 is where it has, like, really strong emotional moments. It's just done really, really well. Doesn't necessarily mean it's perfect. There could still be some issues, but I think the great stuff definitely very much outweighs the negative stuff in that case, and I really recommend 9s. And a 10, well, I don't really have to talk about 10s because, spoiler, I'm giving nothing a 10 this year. I only gave one thing a 10 last year anyway. I will say something got very close this year, but I ultimately did not give it a 10. So, yeah, and anything that's below a 5 is something that I ultimately have a negative view on. Of course, the lower the number, the more negative it is. But when it comes to shows, it's like, a movie is one thing, but if I'm starting to watch a show that I'm, like, gonna give less than, like, a 4, then I'm just not gonna watch any more of it. So there's not really anything that's super low in terms of shows either. So I guess we'll just get started with some seasons of shows that I've talked about before, and why not start off with the, well, ending of the DuckTales show. So we had sort of part 2 of season 3 at the beginning of this year, and definitely the disappointing thing about this is just that it was sort of, announced pretty suddenly that, like, yeah, this is going to be the end of the show. And yeah, I mean, I'm definitely disappointed that we're not seeing more of the show. But at least they got to have an actual ending, so that's nice. And the ending overall, I think, was pretty good. I'm not going to say it was amazing. It felt, some of the reveals are a little strange, but I don't really have a huge problem with it. I have seen some people that have, like, big problems with the ending of this show, and I don't agree with that. If anything, it does feel like they got to the ending a little bit quick, which again, of course, considering they did not plan the ending at this point, it did feel a little bit rushed in that sense. The ending itself, I don't think was rushed, but sort of leading up to the ending was a little bit rushed. And there were some characters that I feel like they definitely should have explored a bit more. Especially, what was her name? Like the alien person, I think Penumbra was her name. That's a character I'm like, I think you're interesting and I want to see more of you, but I'm not going to because there's only so much time. So, overall, did things quite well. The ending itself was pretty good and satisfying. So, I think, did this show have potential to be like an outstanding, amazing, and perfect show? Well, maybe not quite that far, but I think if they could have really developed this as far as they could they maybe have gotten up to a 9? Possibly, but ultimately I'm going to give it a solid 8. So the show, this season, this sort of ending part in 2021, I'd give sort of a lowish 8, but as a whole, I'd give the show a pretty high 8. So, but an 8 it is. So it's a good show, definitely recommend it if you haven't watched it. I wouldn't personally say that, it's amazing. There are some things I do really like about it, again, like Della, for example, I really like. And just the overall character interactions are good, and the writing is generally good. But it didn't get to the, the heights of like, oh my god, the show is amazing, everyone has to see it. But, it's still quite good. So, yeah, not too much to say about that. DuckTales ended off at a pretty strong note. Similarly, another show that ended was the Carmen Sandiego show, which before I looked back on my notes, I totally forgot that I actually saw it. But looking back at it now, it is sort of coming back to me. And I remember when I was talking about the show last year, I was kind of not super great about it. I gave it a 6, where I was like, yeah, it's like, it works well enough, I guess, but I'm just kind of don't really care. And so I remember I watched season 4, just sort of like, as I felt like, well, it's the last season, I might as well watch it, why not? And I actually liked it more than I expected to. Again, I didn't think it was great. I'm still gonna give it a, not like a super high score, but it did make me think, like, maybe I was a bit too harsh on the show, last year. Specifically, at the end of season 4, they sort of kind of tie things back into the beginning of the show, and I remember actually liking the beginning of the show a decent amount, more than I, sort of think I gave credit for. So, I think that, again, I may have been a little bit too harsh, and maybe I want to go back, but, I don't know. Ultimately, I am going to give season 4 of Carmen Sandiego a 7. So, not a glowing recommendation, but it is better than what I thought, what I expected going into it, and it does make me think that maybe my 6 last year was a bit too harsh. So, again, I'm sure if you like the show more than I do, then you probably already seen season 4, but if you haven't, I think most people do like the show more than I do, so I might be just a bit harsh about this, but yeah, I'd say overall season 4 ended up being a 7 for me. It's another season to a show that I thought was also just kind of like fine. Close enough, season 2. Again, I thought season 1 was, it was good most of the time, but about like a third of the time it was just like, wow, this is not funny. So it was one of those things where it mostly worked, but when it didn't work, it was like painfully bad. But season 2, I think, smoothed things out a bit, and it had less moments of like, oh, this doesn't work. So it was a little bit better. I still think I could give season 1 like a very low 7. I'm gonna be giving season 2 a slightly less low 7. So it's not like it's way better or anything. I think the high points are about the same. There's just less low points. So if you like season 1, you'll probably like season 2. If you maybe thought season 1 was pretty good but could be better, you might like season 2 a bit more. I don't know. Again, not a glowing recommendation either, but it's something. I do wish there was a bit more focus on the main characters, the actual, I don't even remember their names, but the two parents. It seemed like they kind of wanted to go a lot more into the side characters, which I guess, for a season 2 that seems to make sense, but I don't know, I kind of like the main characters a bit more. I want to see more of them. But yeah, so season 2 gets a 7. It's more of the same, it's just I think it's a little bit better, so there's that. And then we had season 5 of Rick and Morty, which, I remember when this was coming out, earlier in the year, people were like really negative about this season, and that they're like, wow, this show's so bad now, these creators don't know what they're doing, they're just milking this series or whatever. And I don't see it. Like, okay, is this as good as like season 1 and 2? No, it's not. But I don't know, like, compared to the first half of season 4, I would much rather watch season 5. Like, I'd say season 5 is roughly equivalent to the second half of season 4, which was pretty good. Like, I gave the second half of season 4, I think, a low 9. And I think this is about the same. I mean, maybe I don't know, just think the Rick and Morty humor is just generally works pretty well, and the characterization works pretty well, and I don't know, I don't see this, like, people keep seeing this like huge drop in quality, and I don't see it. Again, I'm not, and I can't say I'm blinded to this because again, I did see a drop in quality for the first half of season 4. I don't see that here, so I don't know, what to say about that. Really, I just thought it was solid in that sense. I mean, were there any real episodes that were like, oh my god, this episode is amazing, perfect or whatever? No, but I don't know. I thought the whole thing was pretty good. Last 2 episodes in particular, I thought were done quite well. So, I don't know. My only guess is maybe that it's not surprising anymore because people kind of know what to expect when it comes to Rick and Morty. So, because if they're like, oh, it's not a surprise, so therefore it's bad, which is like not fair, I think. So I don't know. I think it was good enough. I'm still gonna give it up to a 9. It's a low 9. It's a very low 9, but I think the overall quality, the general quality of Rick and Morty is pretty high. So I think it's just more Rick and Morty. If you haven't seen it for whatever reason and you like Rick and Morty, then I think you'll like it. I don't know why people are so negative about this in certain ways. That said, I don't think it's going to change your mind on the show if you don't like it, but, it is what it is, so there you go. Something else I don't really think is going to change people's minds is Season 2 of the Animaniacs reboot. And this was surprising to me in the fact that, nobody seemed to care about this. I remember Season 1 came out and everyone was like, oh man, new Animaniacs, it's so good, or whatever, and I watched it and I was like, it's fine. And and then Season 2 came out, and, nobody talked about it at all. There was, no fanfare, no marketing, whatsoever. I didn't see anything about it. It was just out suddenly, and I watched it, and I think it's fine. It's just the same as Season 1. So I don't know if people, don't like Season 2, or I have no idea. I just feel like nobody has talked about this season. It's more of the Animaniacs. If you like Season 1, you'll like Season 2. I don't know what to say. There's really nothing to talk about. Well, okay, there's one thing to talk about, and that is that I thought that there were people saying, the creators were saying that, because people I remember after Season 1 were like, well, what about all the other characters, right? And there was that one episode in Season 1 that kind of goes into that, but just what about the other characters? And I remember there was an interview with the creators basically saying, we wanted to make sure we got the main cast down first, and then we'll bring in the other characters later. And so I was like, okay, so Season 2 will have some of the other characters, and it doesn't. My only guess is that this could be one of those situations where, Season 1 and Season 2 were kind of made together, and then they were just sort of split into 2 halves in terms of release, and then so the new characters will be in a Season 3, because I know that's a thing that's happened. The immediate example I can think of is She-Ra, where Season 2 and 3 are half seasons, where they, so I don't know if that was the original plan. I would like to see more characters, because I do think at this point, again, I said this last year, that I don't think the Pinky and the Brain stuff is that great. I just think it's just kind of, I don't know, it's fine. I think the main characters are, the Warners are at least a little bit funnier. But again, overall, I don't love the show. I think it's fine. If you like it, if you like Season 1, you like Season 2. Pretty sure I gave Season 1 a low 7, so I'm going to give Season 2 a low 7. It's the same. I don't know. Not really sure what that deal is. Now, something that I actually did have a pretty good amount of excitement for was Infinity Train Season 4. Because Infinity Train Season 3 was fantastic. It was very, very, very good. And so I was like, oh man, I'm really looking forward to what they're going to do with, continuing with this. And then they announced that the show is basically over, and Season 4 is the final season, and it's like, oh, okay. And from what I gathered, that, I'm pretty sure the original plan was to go to 8 seasons, which, focusing on different characters and different stuff. And from what some of their ideas were, it sounds like this could have been, what we could have gotten would have been really, really good. There's one thing that was mentioned, how one of the characters was going to be an old person suffering from Alzheimer's, and I'm just like, oh shit, that would have been absolutely emotionally destructive. But instead we got this, which it's decent, but as a final season of Infinity Train, it's pretty weak. To me, this is about the same level as Season 2, where it works, it's decent, it has some solid moments, but it doesn't hit me in the same way that Season 3 did, and also the same way Season 1 did. So I think having it be 2 friends that sort of, go through the train together, I think is a good idea. So that's fun. And I think also that, at first anyway, it's presented as one of the friends wants things to go this way, and the other friend wants things to go that way, and it doesn't really take a side. And I think that's done. That's good. That's done really well, and it shows that some people just have, differences that you can't really work through. It doesn't mean that they're, or, one's necessarily correct. But then they kind of do pick a side at the ending, where they sort of, after the resolution, they sort of present things in a certain way, and like, this is how things are going now, and they're happy, and it's like, oh, so one of them was correct. It sort of takes away from that in a way that I thought was a little bit not super well done. But there's that. Let's see, the sort of the car sort of sidekick character or whatever that they get for this is Kez, who is definitely the weakest of the sort of characters that are on the train. I think she's pretty annoying, to be honest. And like, I get the message that they're going with her, but I don't know. It definitely compared to other characters, I just don't think it was done super well. And again, like, Infinity Train is still good at like the emotions of the characters and the writing. Like, again, the art gallery car episode is definitely the highlight for this. But it's just, again, it's on its own, it's good. As a final season of Infinity Train, it's disappointing. So, and I know this was not originally going to be the final season, so I'm not. It's one of those things where it's like, it sucks because of what it is, but it's not their fault. So, I don't know. I gave season 2, I remember, a very high 7. So I'm also going to give season 4 a very high 7. If you really like Infinity Train and you haven't seen this, yeah, go ahead and see it. Just keep in mind that this is not a conclusion to the series. It's not, and that is unfortunate. And I really hope somehow this does get sort of revived. I thought I saw somewhere that part of the reason that they were iffy about this, about sort of continuing the series, the network or whatever, I assume HBO Max at this point, and I'm not really sure exactly the situation because it's originally Cartoon Network and then it's HBO Max, so I don't know ultimately who's in charge here, but basically, because of how season 3 was like really fucking dark and like emotional, they sort of got cold feet and were like, oh, this isn't like great as like a children's show. And I fucking hate that. Like, I know people go like talk about this where it's like people always think like, oh, animation's for kids, which like it's not. But there's still this attitude, especially in like industry kind of stuff, where they're like, if it's animated, we want to, even if it's not made for kids, we want there to still be a noticeable child demographic or whatever. It's like, just don't. It's just So I don't know. It's just really frustrating about the situation. I hope somehow this gets revived because I would absolutely love to see this actually done to its full degree. And yeah, it's very unlikely, but again, as it stands, season 4 works well enough. It's decent, it's solid, but it could be so much better in terms of what we get with Infinity Train, and it seems like we're not going to get any more. So that's really unfortunate. Another season of a new show, or a new season of a show that I saw last year, we had Love, Death, and Robots Season 2. This is something else where I feel like there wasn't really a whole lot of fanfare for this one either. But what stuff that I did find was, again, sort of like with Rick and Morty, a lot of people saying that they don't like this season, and then they're like, this is like, the season is bad. And again, I don't think it is. I mean, is it as good as season 1? No, it's not. There were definitely some episodes in season 1 where it's like, oh shit, this is like really good. And there's nothing in this that really gets up to there. But it's not like, the overall quality is not worse than like the overall quality of season 1. It's really not. There's just, the really good episodes in season 1 are not really present here. So, I don't know. It's one of those things where I don't know, maybe people really, because that's the thing I noticed that sometimes happens is that like, if you have like a 20 episode thing, I don't even remember how many episodes there were originally in season 1. I think it was actually like 15, whatever, doesn't matter. And you take that and like, let's say 4 or 5 of the episodes were like really good, but the other, 10 or 12 or whatever were just sort of like okay. People tend to latch on to the really good ones, and so when you then get something where here's 8 episodes that are all like decent, people are like, oh, this sucks now because it doesn't have really good stuff. It's like, yeah, but like, I don't know, the overall quality is really not that much different. So, yeah, because the only episode here that I wasn't really into was episode 7. It was just sort of, I don't know, kind of, it's the guy sort of stuck in the ship, or was he even in a ship? I don't even remember, but there's like this robot that's kind of after him, whatever. That was sort of, whatever. But overall, I liked season 2 a decent amount, and the one that I liked the most actually was episode 8, which was weird. It was a weird episode. It was the one with the giant, and it just sort of had this weird kind of emotion to it that I can't really explain. I don't know. It was weird, but in a way that I actually liked. So, yeah, I do think overall season 1 is good. But I think this is a decent continuation. I believe there is going to be a season 3. I think they announced that season 2 and season 3 were going to be released a while ago. Well, they announced it a while ago. Obviously, season 3 hasn't released yet. So yeah, I mean, I think it's solid. I gave season 1 a sort of lowish 8, so I'm gonna give season 2 a high 7. Again, not quite as good, but still pretty good. Curious to see some more. I'm definitely would be looking forward to hopefully getting even better episodes. But I don't know. I just similar to the Rick and Morty thing. I think the reaction to this was like overwhelmingly negative, and I don't know why. So if you happen to watch season 1 and liked it, but then you saw this super negative reaction to season 2 and were like, I guess I shouldn't watch it, I would say that you should give it a chance and see what the good stuff is in there. Okay, and then we get something that, to me, though, this is something now that I found extremely frustrating. And that's season 3 of Final Space. Now, I talked about Final Space in our 2019 retrospective video, so that's a long time ago. But the basic gist of it was, I think the show has pretty high potential, but the comedy sort of ruins it. And because the comedy, first of all, is just generally not funny, but also it really sort of, it sort of breaks apart the actual emotion and stuff that's going on. And it was worse than season 1. Okay, so season 1 of Final Space was just like really kind of like, oh, this is kind of hard to get through. Season 2 was better. It was balanced better, and it worked a bit more, but it still had the problems with the comedy or whatever. Season 3, which came out this year, is arguably the best season, but because it's the most frustrating season. Because without the comedy and the weird stuff with the humor, this could be like a 9 out of 10. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. This is like, there are some very good moments in this season. But because of the comedy, it just kills the emotion of what's happening a lot of the time. And it's just like, God, you just be like a good show without trying to like basically be sort of Rick and Morty with the humor. It's not even that kind of way. It's much more, honestly, like childish humor. I mean, it's not saying Rick and Morty is hyper humor, but it's a different sort of angle coming at to it. And it's just, it's so aggravating because I see the potential. Like, if you could take season 3 and just sort of take some bits out and sort of re-edit a few things, and you could make like a 9 out of 10 like show. You could, and it's just so annoying that it's like I can see the potential to this. I absolutely see this really well. And so the main things being, you have Gary and Avocado, which their dynamic I think is really well done, especially being almost like they're both kind of being parents to little Kato. I think that's done really well. Their sort of friendship is really good, and so that's really well done. Ash has the best scene in the show by far. The scene with Ash, and if you've seen this season, you know what I'm talking about, is very good. It kind of comes out of nowhere, but that almost makes it better, which is weird to say. But it works really well. The ending with her is a little bit rushed. I will admit that, but overall, again, done well. So that's something. But then you have the stuff that's not good, like Kevin, who is the worst and shouldn't exist because Kevin sucks. The like biscuit dude is also super annoying and kind of doesn't really do very much, so I don't even know why he's here. He just sucks. And then there's like the whole other plot with Tribor that like is completely useless, so I don't even know why that's in the show. So it's just there's so many good, not so many, but there are really good things in this season, and then there's a lot of stuff that's just not good, and it's so frustrating. How it could be really, really good. It ends up just being like, I don't even know. Like, this is one of those things where it's so hard to rate because, again, you could edit this to be a 9 out of 10 series. You could edit, however, you could sort of take out all the good stuff, and you would have like a 4 out of 10 at best. And so it's like, what the hell do I rate this? So I guess a 7. I don't know. Like, it's just and it's like, well, they are like kind of improving a bit, so maybe it might even get better for season 4. It seems like there is going to be no season 4. It seems like the show's over because there was some corporate merger that happened, and because of that, now the show is canceled. And this season, by the way, does not have an ending. It's a cliffhanger ending. So it's like I can't even really recommend it then because it's like it has some really good stuff, but it's just going to end on a cliffhanger that's never going to be resolved. So I don't know. This is watching Final Space Season 3 was one of the most frustrating experiences this year for the reasons I've said, and it's just I don't know. I don't know. Okay. Anyway, there is some stuff that I should mention that's actually kind of still airing, basically still going on. The first of these is Season 2 of The Owl House. So season 2 of the Owl House, sort of a half of it was released kind of mostly in like the summer, and then it just stopped, and there hasn't been any news since then about that. So hopefully they will continue next year, I guess. I don't know. But also, I remember, I'm so annoyed at this, because I remember specifically last year I said, this is a really good premise for a great show, it has a great start, and I think it could get even better, and I specifically said, I hope this show continues for much longer than Gravity Falls. Guess what? They announced that, no, the show's going to be ending after Season 2, there's going to be, like, 3 specials, and then that's it, and that's going to be the end. I'm just like, oh, really? Oh my god. So, hopefully, again, like DuckTales, they'll at least have a satisfying conclusion. And hopefully they'll be able to make it where if you do watch the whole thing, it doesn't feel rushed and it doesn't feel weird. I'm sure it's going to feel like there are certain things that just aren't going to be explored well enough because of this constraint. But for now, what has been shown is still pretty damn good. The character interactions continues to be good. The development continues to be good. It is at a pretty fast pace. But considering they're trying to wrap up the show, basically in another, like, 10 episodes and then the 3 specials, they kind of need to be at a pretty quick pace, so, okay, fine. And, yeah, I think it just continues to do really well with what it's trying to be. The best episode was definitely the Hootie episode, which, you know, who would have saw that coming? Which just had lots of great moments, and, you know, had like the most development of like plot and of like in like one episode that like any show has ever seen. But it works weirdly. So yeah, that episode's really good. I think I'm still ultimately going to give this an 8. I don't think I'm going to move it up to a 9, but I could see this being a show where once it's all done, again, if it doesn't feel rushed, even if there are some incomplete things, I could ultimately kind of give this a 9 at the end of the day, but as of now, I'm still going to give it an 8. So it's good if you still need to check up on Season 2. They didn't drop the ball or anything, so it's still good, but we have to see how things continue with Season 2 going into next year. And then we have Young Justice Season 4. Now, I have said that Young Justice, was honestly, like, a really, really good show, and had really, really good writing, and I think how they use the characters, and also the plot progression, and how they interacted with, like, the actual world, and the parallels with the real world, I think were done really, really well, especially Season 1 and Season 2. Now, Season 3 was a little bit of a step down. Now, I saw a lot of people say Season 3 is bad. It's not bad. It's not even okay. Honestly, I would still give Season 3 a 9 out of 10, but this is like, Season 1 and Season 2 are like high 9s, and Season 3 is a low 9. Right, so it is a little bit of a step down. I do think the focus kind of shifts a bit more in terms of the characters, and some of the plot is a little bit messy, but I think overall it does work really well in terms of the characters and in terms of the writing, so that's enough to keep it going. Season 4 is another step down, and it's kind of weird to me, because it seems like they just had like they made a weird decision, which I think kind of screwed the show over. They decided to break up the season into multiple arcs. So episodes 1 to 4 is one arc. Episodes 5 to 8 is another arc, and episodes 9 to, well, so far I've only seen episode 12, but it also seems like episode 13 will also be the same arc. Is this other arc, and I think that sort of automatically makes the storytelling worse. Now, some shows can use the arc structure really well. Star Wars: The Clone Wars uses it extremely well, but here I don't think it works as well, and it just sort of makes the story feel. It makes it feel like it doesn't matter as much, because it's again, that it's one small arc, and I'm sure there's going to be something at the end of the season where somehow it all comes together and it's supposed to make sense, but at this point, it really doesn't seem like that. So I don't know. Again, we're still in the middle of this airing, so this is definitely going to be something I'll have to talk about next year in terms of how I think Season 4 ultimately is, but as of now, it is definitely not as well done. Now, again, I still think the characterization mostly quite well. I still think the writing is mostly pretty good. So even though it is a step down, I'm still going to give this a pretty high score. But yeah, it is kind of weird how they do this. So let me kind of briefly go over the arcs. So the first arc is about Mars. It's about McGann and Connor going to Mars to get married. And a lot of people were shitting on this arc, and I understand why. The story is just not very interesting. They sort of set this up as like, it's like a murder mystery. The king of Mars was murdered, and they're trying to figure out why. And it's weird because, like, since Martians are telepathic, they, like, basically no one ever really murders anybody because you would just be able to read someone's mind and know about it. So what's the point? And like, I don't just how the story is presented. It's like you don't care because like there's no reason for the characters to really get involved in this except just like they should because it's the right thing to do. And it's like I guess, but I don't know, And the thing is, they really play the Martian society is very much like a whole racism like allegory. It's not even an allegory; they blatantly say it. And I have seen people say that it's kind of nice to have this stuff be a bit more blatant and obvious instead of kind of a bit more in the background where some people could ignore it, and you cannot ignore it in this. But like, it is a bit too blatant, I would say. I think this is where you get to a point where it's like, okay, yeah, like Martian people are racist against each other. Like, we get it. It's like it's a bit much, and since the characters have no direct stake in things a lot of the time, it feels like this just doesn't matter. I will say it looks very nice. I think the Mars, like the environment of Mars and how they design the sort of culture or whatever is very interesting. That's well done. The visuals are good. But the story of just like, I don't care what's going on and how the thing ends. Again, this arc ends, it's like a character dies. And I don't believe it. It's really weird how this character dies. It comes off in a really weird way, kind of out of nowhere. And I don't know. They're really playing it up like, no, this character's totally dead. And I'm just like, no, I don't think they are. And but I feel like I'm being gaslit because of how much the characters are like, nope, this character's totally dead. And I'm just like, so I don't know. Like, I feel like no matter which it is, whether if the character actually is dead or if it's like, nope, just kidding, the character shows up again later, I feel like no matter what they do, because of how they've treated it, I will feel disappointed. So, I don't know. Yeah, that's definitely a weaker part with that. The second arc is noticeably better, and this is with Artemis dealing with the League of Shadows. The premise of this is that basically you have two people that are both supposedly defecting from the League of Shadows, but they're both saying the other one is a plant. And Artemis has to be like, who do I trust, right? I think like that's decently compelling. It directly impacts Artemis's character, not just, because they're both coming into her life, but also the whole thing with her sister and her baby and all that kind of stuff. So like, it's done. It's this story actually matters more, and I'm part of it. I'll admit is that Artemis is my favorite character of the show, so I'm gonna like what happens with her a lot. And I think it's overall this is done quite well. There is a thing that's like a flashback involving Barbara Gordon. Again, if you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. That is like kind of weird in terms of like, wait, why did you do this? So like, there's that. But overall, I think the second arc is pretty dang good. And I think that one works quite well. The third arc, again, as of now, has not been resolved. I mean, at the time that basically the day this video goes up, presumably the last episode of this arc will have aired, but I obviously can't see at this point. So it's involving like magic and Zatanna basically like training these kind of new younger like teens to kind of use sort of magic stuff and dealing with this sort of Clarion and the chaos beings and stuff. And like, I'm interested in the fact that like this show hasn't really gone into magic stuff, so okay, it's a new angle to go into. But again, this is also something where I'm like, I don't know. I just think it's kind of fine in terms of the story. It at least impacts the characters more than it does with the Mars thing, so it works better there. But I don't have any specific attachment to what's going on. So, yeah, and again, it's like, how are these supposed to connect with each other? I don't know. So, at the end of the day, I do think there is an overall quality to Young Justice still in terms of the writing and the character moments. But it is definitely weaker in terms of how the plot's being delivered, and I think it's largely just because this whole arc thing that they've set up for this season. So, I don't know, maybe, at the end of the season I'll think that it's actually amazing and they did do something really, really well and I just didn't see it coming, or it might just kind of feel kind of flat and eh. So, for now I am going to give it an 8, but I could see this going up or down, honestly, depending on how this goes. So, yeah, I'll admit I'm a little bit disappointed, but I have very high expectations for Young Justice, and it hasn't really met them, so I don't know. We'll see how things go in the future with that. I don't know. But speaking of disappointing, oh boy, okay. So there was a little show that I watched last year called Genlock. I watched season 1. And Genlock, it's a small show. The premise of it is basically that you have, these characters who can sort of like, digitally connect their minds to these machines which they can control, and they're part of, this military organization and they're fighting and there's stuff going on, whatever. It's a decent show. I think there's some decent stuff explored with it, some decent character moments, and the small scale story that happens in season 1 is overall pretty well done. It also sort of clearly, even though you have this rather self-contained story, it's clearly part of a much bigger thing that they can sort of build up to as more seasons happen. So I was like, this is pretty good starting point. I'm curious to see how this goes forward. What the fuck happened? Season 2 is bonkers in the bad way. It is all over the place. The plot, like when I'll fully admit, I didn't really remember a lot of the specifics of season 1 stuff when I started season 2, so that might be a little bit on me, but I swear season 2 just dumps a whole bunch of information right from the beginning of stuff that like happened, you know, off screen between seasons, and it's like, that seemed like it would be important things for us to actually see. Instead, like, season 2 feels like we jumped into like season 4. Like, it feels like so much has happened since season 1, and the scale of things is so different. All of a sudden the plot is about this big war between, you know, these two major factions, and like the characters just happen to be a part of it. It's not about the characters anymore. I mean, it is a little bit, but that's not the focus. And so it's honestly hard to like catch up to like what's even going on. So there's that. And you know, what they do is they try to kind of get an angle on like both sides of this conflict that's going on. You have like the polity and the union, and the polity, they kind of show that like, and again, that's the side that the Denmark people are on, but there's stuff that going on with them that's like not great. And meanwhile, the union is sort of, at least they're kind of portraying that like, hey, we're actually offering like peace and salvation to people, and that sounds like a good idea. Turns out their version of peace is to be like disassembled by a nanobot swarm that they think is like an equivalent to like going to heaven. This sounds like a spoiler, but this is shown in like episode 2, so I mean, kind of a spoiler. Like I've said before, like I don't want to try to spoil shows because I want to sort of give people like what I think about them, while also, you know, because I generally want to see if, you know, maybe you want to see the shows from what I say. But I'm going to be spoiling this because I don't think you should see this. So they have that with like the union, and it's like, okay, that's a decent idea, having it be almost this like cult in a sense that like, but like people believe it. Like that's a decent idea to explore, but they kind of don't really. They have sort of one episode that explores it a decent amount, and then so it's like, okay, this could work, but then they just sort of move on from that and don't do any more with it. So there's that. And oh, something about this season is that, so the first season, it's you know, it does have, for example, some swearing, and like I thought that actually worked well in season 1 because it was mostly confined to like one character, Cammy, and you know, if you see like, okay, that's part of, you know, their personality, that's fine, because I have said in, you know, previous times, one of my problems with PG-13 action movies is it does feel like the characters oftentimes like go out of their way to not swear when you feel like based on their emotions and what's going on, you think that they would. And here, though, they have like swearing kind of common with many characters. It like this is in this the swearing in season 2 feels like someone wrote in the swears specifically to sound more adult, and it's like it doesn't feel right. It feels weird. Also, there are 2 sex scenes in this show, which you see a lot, and it's like, okay. One of them is basically completely meaningless. It doesn't matter at all. And the other one is actually potentially related to something that's interesting. So, okay, so one of the characters in this is Val, who is non-binary. Well, it's more gender fluid, right? They have like a female presentation and a male presentation. In season 1, they were presenting female, but in season 2, they're presenting male, which is like, okay, fine. And then there's this other character, Kazu, who, you know, is this character that he's sort of kind of like, I'm about being, you know, masculine, manly, you know, I'm Japanese, strong, fighting man or whatever. And something that they have interesting is that in this sort of digital scape that where they have their minds, you know, they can sort of manifest different, you know, versions of themselves. And Kazu starts manifesting himself as like partly female, and he gets like freaked out about this. He's like, I'm man, whatever. And I'm like, okay, are they just gonna sort of be like trying to do a thing where like he's actually trans? That seems kind of weird to have them do, because it doesn't seem like that's what would make sense for him. But no, what they do instead is actually pretty interesting. They say that because he sort of views himself as weak because he can't do certain things, he views weakness as a feminine trait, so he's therefore visualizing himself as feminine. And I'm like, that's actually kind of interesting if you want to go into this. And then they have it where Val, as like, you know, a gender fluid but presenting male currently, and Kazu, who again has like is male but has like, you know, sort of generated like a female, at least like anatomically female body. They actually have like a sex scene in like the digital scape, which is like, the scene itself is like whatever, but like the implications that are actually kind of interesting in terms of what this means in terms of sexuality and stuff. So it's like, okay, this could be kind of interesting. Kazu just dies, like, literally, like, the next scene. And it's like, okay, like, you literally, like, forced yourself into the bury your gaze trope, like, as hard as possible. And it's like, like, this is not an accident. This is, like, you literally, like, made it this way on purpose. And it's like, why did you do this? You had something that was actually interesting, and then you just do that, and it's like, okay, cool. And the thing is, that's not even the worst thing. The worst thing is after this, so Cammy gets, like, depressed, okay? And she's sort of linking this to how, like, she thought the Genlock team was, like, her family, because her actual family, like, basically just kept dying around her, and it was really sad and depressing. So when Kazu dies, she gets, like, fully depressed, which is, like, honestly, I mean, it feels kind of weird to have Cammy be the one that's depressed, but, like, I guess the argument is, like, oh, anyone can be depressed, even if it doesn't look like it, okay, whatever. But she goes to the Union, and literally, like, gets herself, like, again, she goes through the whole disassembling thing with the nanobots, and, like, the show plays this as, like, a really serious thing that, like, and they literally have, like, the whole, like, you know, PSA text about, you know, if you have suicidal thoughts, call this number or whatever, and it's like, okay, so you're saying Cammy killed herself. Like, that's literally what you're saying, as clear as possible. Like, Cammy is now dead, and she killed herself. She committed suicide. And it's like, okay, this feels kind of weird, but alright, if you're gonna go there, okay, fine. The next episode, Cammy's alive. Well, not alive. She's somehow, like, a being made of, like, nanobots that has, like, coalesced into a singular form that can, like, do all these things, like, flying around and, like, hacking machines from a distance or whatever, and it's like, you turned her into a superhero. You took Cammy, who you explicitly basically said killed herself, and she is now a superhero. How did nobody realize that that is a terrible idea? Like, really, you're saying that this thing that is you literally directly linked said was the same as committing suicide actually results in the character getting superpowers. And yes, they try to justify it with, like, oh, it's because of the Genlock thing, blah, blah, blah. But, like, then why did you pretend that it was literally, like, suicide? Like, oh my god. So I cannot believe that they actually went through with that. And it's just, and, like, and the thing is, at the very end, they don't even have the balls to go through with it all the way, because so the whole thing at the end of the season is that the Union has unleashed the nanobots to basically sort of, like, try to disassemble everybody, and the whole thing was that, like, oh, well, if we literally, because we have this ability to somehow, I don't really understand this, but what, because I don't think it explains it very well, but they somehow have this ability to, like, make everyone sort of, like, be able to form a digital consciousness, which is what made Cammy, you know, able to maintain a sense of self in the nanobot swarm. So, like, the idea is that they would have everyone, like, everyone in the world, or at least everyone in the US, I guess, I don't know, it's kind of not clear, you know, basically, like, become a digital version of themselves that's part of a nanobot swarm. And I'm like, that could be interesting, because like, a lot of times, you know, I think about, like, Matrix stuff or things where people are in a digital world or whatever. It's always talked about from the sense, like, yeah, there's the digital world and there's the real world. But I'm like, what if you just had a digital world and people lived in the digital world and that's all they knew and that was it? I think there could be some really interesting things to explore with that. And I'm like, okay, if you're setting this up for a season 3, maybe. But then they don't do it. They just stop the nanobots without doing that. And it's like, oh, okay, sure. And then the way they end the show, they end it in such a way where it's like, see, look, this is a definitive ending, even though they clearly could do more if they wanted to, but I don't think they will, because, like, everyone, you know, I'm not alone in thinking that this season is kind of a complete mess. I know other people do as well, and, like, I know I've said that if a show is bad, I don't keep watching, but this was, like, intriguingly bad. I'm like, how are they doing this? Like, it was just so weird, and, like, how they kept going through with this, and I'm just like, I don't know, this... Oh, I completely forgot about this. There's this other character who apparently was, like, at the very end of season 1. I don't remember this, that I think his name is Sinclair. He just shows up and he's involved in some sort of plot in the background. He's almost completely irrelevant. Like, they really treat him as like, oh my god, look at this important dude doing stuff, and it's like, he's barely involved. He's barely involved with the main characters. He does, like, 2 things that you could totally have some other character do. I don't know why he's here. It's just, it's so, yeah, I don't like this season. It's very poorly done. Any sort of potential that season 1 had to continue itself is completely destroyed. At best, this is a 4. I might be generous, honestly. Like, maybe this show deserve a 3. I don't know. I'm gonna give it a 4, but, like, yikes. It's not good. It's really not good. Again, there are some individual scenes and some individual ideas that if you take it, you know, by itself, it's not bad. It's pretty good. There's some things to that. But how they use those and the potential for them later and how they squander stuff, it's just... it's no, no. It's just I don't understand. Now, before we move on to just actual new shows, let alone just new seasons, there's two things that I want to talk about. Well, these are two sort of movies or specials that were linked to shows they've talked about before. So the first of these I'm going to talk about is Adventure Time Distant Lands. So last year we got the BMO special and the Obsidian special, both of which I like a lot. I'd probably say BMO is like a low 9, whereas Obsidian was like a kind of mid-high 9. This year we got Together Again in Wizard City. Together Again is fantastic. Emotions are phenomenal. It's just extremely well done. I love Together Again. It's kind of the perfect epilogue to Adventure Time. Like that, if I was ranking that by itself, I would say that maybe would be a 10. It's extremely well done. Wizard City is fine. I don't know. It works well enough. Again, the writing, humor, Adventure Time, I think is generally done pretty well. But I don't know. It's just not super interesting to me. It's a fine story, and that's it. And it feels really weird that Together Again came out first, and Wizard City came out afterwards. And originally I thought the order was originally the other way around. Because again, Together Again is the perfect epilogue. If that was the last Adventure Time thing to be released, it would be perfect. But it's not. Wizard City came out after that, and Wizard City was, again, fine. So, that's the weirdest thing to me, is why they switched the order. If they didn't switch the order, then I wouldn't have any problem whatsoever. So, Wizard City is, like, I don't know, kind of high 7, low 8, I don't know. But, again, so if you average this out in terms of all 4 Distant Lands episodes, it probably would be, I think, like a low 9. I don't know. It's still really good. If you haven't seen the Distant Lands stuff, you definitely should. Maybe you could skip Wizard City, but... or at least watch it before Together Again, because Together Again should be the last Adventure Time thing you see, because it is extremely good and it works really well with that. So there's that there. The other sort of movie that kind of came, as sort of the ending to a series, or actually multiple series, is Trollhunters Rise of the Titans. So again, it's something else that I mentioned 2 years ago, is I watched Trollhunters and also Three Below, and I like them. I don't love them. I think Trollhunters is, again, sort of a good, solid show, has definitely some good stuff in it, but overall doesn't ever really get anything that's, like, really super great. Three Below, I actually like a little bit more, particularly season 1, because I thought the humor was actually pretty funny. It was so absurd that I thought it was, pretty good. Season 2 is a bit more kind of standard sort of story, it was decent, fine, but it worked overall. Then last year, I watched Wizards, which I thought was just kind of not super great. The story was kind of a mess, and the characters I didn't really care about, and stuff they set up was kind of weird. So that was kind of, and it did feel largely like set up for, well, this movie. And so I came into this movie with kind of low expectations, and that might be why I actually liked it more than I thought I would. I don't think it's great, keep in mind. But I don't know, I thought the action was fun. And I, just got more invested in what was going on than I thought it would. Now, I do think the use of the characters is still a little bit off balance. Definitely the Trollhunters characters are by far used more than Three Below or the Wizards characters. Which, I expected that, so I don't feel too bad about it. If anything, it was a little bit better of a balance than I thought there would be, because it really felt like, that the Three Below characters would be, completely sidelined, and they're not. So... that's something, but it's still not, it's not as good as it, basically, it's better than I thought it would be, but it's not as good as it could have been. So, there's that. And then, the ending, I have seen a lot of people really dislike the ending. I don't hate it, because I thought it could have been worse. So, I don't want to spoil the ending, but there's something they do, which is okay, it isn't great, but it is something that, again, I think it could have been worse than what they did. So, but it is kind of a weird way to end it. So, I don't know. It's, ultimately, I liked this enough. I would give this a 7. If you do really like the Trollhunter stuff, I think you'll probably like this, but again, the ending might piss you off. But again, if you just didn't really care about the series or whatever, I don't think this will change your mind. So, I think it's decent overall. So, that's something. Okay, now we have actual, new shows that began airing this year. And the first of these that I want to talk about is Star Wars The Bad Batch. Now, I came into this show really not caring that much, because I watched the Bad Batch stuff from Season 7 of the Clone Wars, and I thought it was fine. I didn't really care about the characters too much. whatever. And so the main reason I honestly even watched the show in the first place is because they sort of advertised this series as almost like a sequel to the Clone Wars. And I'm like, well, shit, I mean, it's the Clone Wars, and, you know, same people working on it. It's probably not going to be bad, so sure, why not? I'll watch this. And I actually liked this a lot more than I thought I would. I actually did really get into the characters in this. And I think it does a really good job in that sense. Now, they do sort of introduce this character, Omega, who is this sort of younger kid character who ends up, you know, with the Bad Batch characters. And at first I'm like, is this going to be sort of a Mandalorian Baby Yoda situation where you have this sort of, you know, strong, tough fighter warrior people dealing with this like kid or whatever? And it's not. It's not like that. It largely because, again, Omega is not like a baby. So she actually like does things and she gets involved and then she helps and she does grow and develop throughout the series. And also her relationship with the older characters also grows and develops throughout the series. So that's actually done quite well. And it ended up, it was something that I thought might be an issue, but it ended up not being an issue. So that's good. I will say with the characters, it's not equal screen time, basically. Again, Omega and Hunter, and I'd say Wrecker are probably definitely given the most characterization. Also, Crosshair is given a decent amount too. Tech and Fives, is it Fives? No, not Fives. Echo. Tech and Echo are definitely given the least characterization. But hey, this is season 1. We have more seasons, so we'll maybe see some more characterization with that. So I'm saying it's not a huge problem at the moment. If the whole show goes by and that's how it continues to be, well then, okay, yeah, sure. But just keep in mind that, yeah, there is clearly a hierarchy in terms of what characters are more important, and, you know, that's fine for now. So there is that. In terms of the actual overall story, I do think it's really interesting seeing this transition from Republic to Empire. They handled that really well. There's a great episode where they sort of end up sneaking into this sort of base, and it's very much visually and even musically, it has a lot of cues with actually the original trilogy and sort of the design of like the Death Star hallways, and like there's some again, music things, that motifs that go through there, and that's done really well, as well as other stuff that they do is shown in this transition that I think is really well done. So there's that. There are definitely some connections with characters that show up later, so that's done well. And yeah, the animation is, you know, again, Clone Wars Season 7 looked great. This also looks great. I will say there are a number of moments where it's pretty dark, and so it can be hard to see what's going on. So that's a little bit of a criticism, but again, overall it does look quite well, quite good. And speaking of dark, this show is actually pretty fucked up in a lot of ways. They don't hold back. They literally have like innocent people getting executed at one point. So yeah, it's pretty heavy with some of the stuff that they deal with. And the climax of season 1. So again, this is clearly a season 1. There's going to be more going forward, but the climax of season 1 is actually like kind of emotional in terms of what happens. I don't want to spoil it. But it's effective. It works really well. And honestly, if we're comparing the animated Star Wars shows, the season 1s, so season 1 of Clone Wars, season 1 of Rebels, season 1 of Resistance, which, whatever, but, you know, and season 1 of Bad Batch, this is the best season 1. By a pretty substantial margin, to be honest. So that was very good promise for future seasons. So I'm actually really excited to see more of this. I think this was very good. If you were on the fence, because again, maybe you thought, you know, oh, these are just kind of gimmick characters from Clone Wars, whatever, meh. I think you should give this a chance. It's better than I thought it would be. And I think it really, you know, is it perfect and amazing? No, but it does a pretty damn solid job. And I would give this, honestly, a pretty high 8. I think this handles itself quite well, and I'm really looking forward to actually seeing more of this. I really didn't think would be happening. So yeah, really good job in that, for that regard. And we also got another animated Star Wars thing, and, you know, this is Star Wars Visions. And while I do kind of have the anime section, which I'm going to separate out later, I decided to talk about this now because, I don't know, I felt like it. So, yeah, if you don't know, this is basically anime Star Wars. It's where you have several different shorts made by different studios that are in the Star Wars universe, but are not, you know, are either not necessarily canon, or they are very obviously not canon because there's something going on that's very different than you know, the actual Star Wars canon, and that's fine. I think this is a great opportunity to show some just completely different stuff, both the anime style, but also, you know, some ideas of character and story which just don't really work in, you know, the overall show, the overall Star Wars canon. So I think conceptually this is a fantastic idea, and honestly, the concept alone sort of carries us a bit. Because the actual quality of the different shorts is, it depends. It ranges. So let me quickly go through what I have for everything here. The first short was The Duel, and it is, it's a duel, and it's action-wise and, visually, it's very impressive visually. It works. There's definitely some cool designs with the characters and stuff like that. There's not a huge amount of substance behind it, but it's fun to watch. It's good. And the second one was Tatooine Rhapsody. This is your sort of like your musical episode or whatever. It's pretty damn silly. And I think that if someone was really into this kind of stuff, they would probably like it. But this is just not really a genre I really care too much about. So ultimately, I just thought it was sort of like fine. It's pretty silly. So I don't know. This one's kind of okay. The Twins is definitely one with the action is absolutely kind of nuts and I think works really well. But this is one where, and this is sort of the problem of this format, is that because these shorts are so, short, it's like it will hint at something bigger that I want to see a lot more of. And that's an example of this, where the overall, what we got in terms of the action is pretty damn good, and it works really well, but I want to see more of this. And I don't know if we ever will, so that's kind of the unfortunate thing about that. Again, similarly, the one after this is The Village Bride, which, again, I think that sort of the emotion of what's going on and the tension of what's going on is done really well. And you do see a little bit more of the overall picture here, but I do also feel like I want more of this one, too. So, there's that. Then we have The Ninth Jedi, which this is one which I definitely want to see. This is the one that I think is done the best. It has sort of it does have a more sort of complete story of sort of like here's an inciting incident and then the plot builds, there's a climax or whatever to this story. But this is definitely a sort of setup in a situation which I want to see a lot more of. And a lot of people agree with me on this. This is probably the one that most people think is the best one and the most interesting for the future. And this is something where how it's set up, like, this is something where I could conceivably see as being something that's, like, way in the future, right, of Star Wars timeline. So this is something that could conceivably sort of come back, maybe. But they would have to sort of handwave some things. So, I don't know. Maybe. Let's see. Oh, the T0B1. This is the whole, like, kind of Astro Boy kind of thing where they have, like, the droid that's, trying to be alive or whatever. And, this is my least favorite one. Honestly, I find the Toby character to be pretty annoying. And I remember this sound effects are really weird in this episode. So there's that, and visuals are decent, but I don't know, it's just kind of, this is definitely the one that I think is I'm least into. And then we have The Elder. This one, another one that has a good action, and there's very interesting and the tension of this episode. This one's definitely the most like, sort of tense in terms of what's going on, and so that's done really well. And again, this one also sort of hints at sort of other stuff happening that could be interesting to get into. I personally think like Ninth Jedi, for example, is better at this, but it's still done quite well. And the biggest sort of culprit of this is, again, is Lop and Ocho. And this is absolutely the one where I'm like, God damn it, I just want more of this. Like, this is, I think, a really enticing premise, and these characters are interesting, but I need more. I need more of this story, and I have no idea if we'll ever get that, which is disappointing. So, what I get is really good. I just want more, and that, because again, this one, at least, like, the story doesn't even feel complete, right? At least the Ninth Jedi, it told a story within this setting. This does not tell a full story. So it's just and the last part is Akakiri, and this one's very weird. It's kind of the most similar to probably The Duel. It's very visually stylized, and also the soundtrack is very odd. It's another one of those where like it has interesting potential, but this one's just very strange. And it's a very odd one to be the ending. Like, this one doesn't feel like this one should be the ending. I'm not really sure which one which one would I make as the ending? I don't know, maybe Ninth Jedi, because it's the most sort of, like, normal, complete story? I don't know. So it's a weird as fuck one. Akakiri is probably the weirdest one. Overall, again, this is definitely carried by the premise of this. The premise of this is really cool. But the overall sort of execution varies. The only one I don't really like, again, I don't like Toby, and I don't like the Tatooine Rhapsody one. That's a personal thing. I'm just not into this kind of thing. Everything else is at least decent, but it's just frustrating because I want more of this. I want these stories, these sort of worlds, these settings to be explored a lot more, and I have no idea if that will even happen. Even if they do more Vision stuff, it's very likely they'll just do other shorts that are not related to these. So, it's kind of frustrating in terms of giving it a rating. I think just the concept of it is so good that I am going to end up giving it an 8, but this is just sort of just barely an 8. Some people might get sort of less frustrated by the things that frustrate me, and they might get sucked into more just to what it is versus like what it could be. But yeah, so that's how I'm going to view it. Definitely, so I would say it's definitely recommended, just purely based on what it is. But yeah, that's kind of what that is there. Speaking of, some sort of alternate realities of, popular media franchises, What If? So this is, the MCU animated show about potential sort of alternate realities and different sort of, again, what if scenarios. And again, this is another thing that is absolutely really banks on just the premise itself being interesting. And again, this mostly does deliver in this case with this premise, and I think it overall does, pretty damn good job. The visuals for this is sort of this kind of 3D, kind of super shaded, cel-shaded kind of design. That my immediate thought was it looks like Star Wars Resistance, which I don't think the show is that great, but at least the visuals, I think, work decently well for what they're trying to do there, and I think it works well what they're trying to do here as well. So the visuals are pretty good. Again, I'm going to kind of go through the different episodes here because they're kind of not, they're separate things mostly. So the first one is basically, you have Peggy Carter becoming Captain America instead of Steve Rogers. And this is the one that I feel like they sort of marketed the most, and because the whole Captain Britain sort of aesthetic or whatever is like that's very prominent in like all the posters and like the trailers or whatever for this. But like I think this was the weakest episode, like because they basically just retell the plot of the first Avenger, but just with Peggy instead, and it's like okay, like it's just whatever. It's not very exciting, because that's it, and I don't know. They really don't change very much. So it's kind of like I saw this episode and I was like, okay. I mean, if that's all this is going to be, then this is going to be kind of not that great. So I was kind of, after this first episode, I was kind of like, I'm not sure if I'm going to like this that much. Water. But the second episode is definitely an upgrade, and that is where T'Challa gets picked up instead of Peter Quill by Yondu. So they sort of like, so it's going to be Guardians of the Galaxy, but with T'Challa. And at first, it seems like they're going to do that, but they very clearly make the point that because it's T'Challa and not Peter Quill, like, a lot is different. So, he's actually, like, pretty well known, and people like him a lot. What they do with Thanos here, I think, is actually really fun. So there's that. That's neat. And also Nebula, I think, is done pretty well here as well. And they definitely tell a different story. This is not just Guardians of the Galaxy again. So this is a much better example of, like, what I was hoping that we would get as just sort of, like, a, solid story with that since there. So I think this one does a really good job. Third, we had this story where it was this was kind of like a retelling of like sort of early MCU stuff, but basically the Avengers keep dying. So like the moment where Nick Fury meets Tony Stark in the diner or whatever in Iron Man 2, Tony just dies, and it's like, what the fuck? And like there's the moment where like Hawkeye dies, and like the Hulk dies, and like all of these characters start just dying, like in a really random points, and it's like, what the fuck is going on? And I don't know, it's one of those things where like looking back on it, maybe it seemed kind of obvious, but like I don't know, I legitimately was like not sure where this was going, and I was invested in the story and the sort of intensity of what was going on, so I really liked this one actually. The fourth one is the best one, it's like for sure. This is about Doctor Strange and what happens if he sort of gets consumed by grief about the car accident. And where in his version, again, the car accident kills, I forgot her name, but the girlfriend or whatever, that actually kills her, and he gets consumed by grief. And this is the best one. And, yeah, it's really, really well done. The emotion is fantastic. This is the best one, for sure. So yeah, I remember something posted a picture that was like, this episode 4 of What If should be called Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Sadness. And I'm like, yeah, that works really well. So yeah, that's definitely the best one. The fifth one was the Marvel Zombies. This one, I've seen a lot of people say that like the tone of this is a bit inconsistent because, zombies are kind of scary, but there's a lot of like jokes or whatever. I don't know. I didn't really have that much of an issue of it. I think overall this is done also pretty well. It's not amazing. I do think there's some ideas about it that are actually really interesting. The whole thing with Vision and Wanda in that, I think this is kind of a really cool thing with that. That's pretty fucked up. So there's that. But it's not like one of the. It's a decent one. Um, and then you have the one with Killmonger, where Killmonger basically is the one that actually saves Tony Stark at the beginning of Iron Man 1, and how he gets sort of involved with Tony and kind of, early Avengers stuff. And this one I think is really interesting in terms of the story and kind of where they take the characters. But this is probably the worst one in terms of just the story just stopping right when it seems like it's going to get even more interesting. So that's an unfortunate problem with this one. This is definitely one that I would absolutely, if they're going to do it, I believe they are confirmed they're going to do season 2. If they do continue any of these scenarios, this is the one they absolutely need to continue, for sure. And I don't know if they're planning on doing that, but we'll see. Next one, the episode 7 is the Party Thor episode. It's fun, it's not amazing, but it's just kind of seeing these characters goof off and be kind of ridiculous or whatever. It works. You have this sort of punching match between Thor and Captain Marvel, which is fun. Yeah, nothing too much to say about this. It's enjoyable. And then the last 2 episodes are sort of this kind of climax where, the premise is Ultron actually manages to get the Infinity Stones. And what happens from there? And he gets basically to be this like incredibly powerful being to the point where the Watcher actually has to sort of interfere and stuff happens. And it works. It overall works. There's a lot of fun action with this one, and it is, it's one of those things where you kind of expected there to be some sort of connection between these ultimately, and that's how this is done here. So it ultimately is pretty good. There is something that is kind of weak involving sort of what they do with the sort of the Doctor Strange scenario. Again, I don't really want to spoil it, but something that like other people pointed out, and I was like, yeah, that's not great. But overall, I think it works pretty well. Again, the action is great, and it's just it has some kind of hype to it that works quite well. So, yeah, I think this is, this is pretty similar in concept to Visions. I think that, again, visually and sort of conceptually visually in terms of that sense, Visions is more impressive because again, the anime style and also how they're all different styles. But in terms of like the actual story and execution, I actually like this a bit more. So What If, I'm still giving it an 8, but it's a higher 8. Again, Visions was like kind of a very low 8, right in the border of 7. This is more moderate-ish 8, I would say. So What If is pretty good, pretty solid. Definitely looking forward to seeing more of it. And hopefully, again, especially the Killmonger episode, they can actually extend onto this and see even more about it. We'll see. So there's that. Okay, next is something that I was not going to watch until a lot of shitty people started complaining about it. And then I'm like, you know what? Since you people are so mad about this, I'm going to watch it. So I watched Masters of the Universe Revelation. And I have no connection to He-Man at all. Because, again, I watched the She-Ra show new recently, and I only did that, in 2019 because I don't even really know why. I saw it on Netflix, and I was like, oh, don't people say this is good? What the hell, I'll watch it. I ended up loving the show. This has nothing to do with that, and I don't know anything about He-Man besides the very basics of, like, he exists, and I recognize a couple characters by, like, name and what they look like, and that's it. So I was not going to watch this, but then I saw all these, conservative reactionary weirdos saying, oh my god, the show is so woke or whatever, and I'm just like, you guys are so mad that now I'm curious. So I decided to actually look into the show. And so that premise of this is that it is a direct sequel to the original show. And in episode 1, He-Man fucking dies. And they sort of transition to have the main character be Teela. And I'm like, okay, so this is why everyone's mad, because He-Man is dead, okay? So He-Man is dead. They're like, oh my god, they were making the show about He-Man, and they killed He-Man, he's dead, and now they have this woman being the main character. And like, yeah, she is. I mean, like, the thing is, how they were talking about Teela, some of these people, I'm like, okay, so what, is she like, this like radical feminist, like, lesbian or something? And like, no, she's totally not. I mean, like, yeah, she's like, like muscular and a fighter, but like, so is everyone in this world, so like, who cares? Like, in terms of the actual story, what they do with Teela, it's totally like, it's the hero's journey, kind of like, we gotta go to this thing and get the magical stuff to do the whatever, and it's like, the story is not progressive by any means. It's like, it's fine. It's not anything super interesting. But like, they're acting it's this is like woke propaganda, and I'm like, it's literally not. Like, literally, you are just seeing that the main character is now female, and you're shitting yourself with rage. It's so like, it's completely ridiculous. This is something that people got so upset about. And the thing is, like, I said if He-Man dies, he's still part of the story. First of all, characters talk about him all the time, about like, oh my god, he meant so much to me or whatever. But then like, part of the show goes into like the afterlife, and like he's there and stuff happens with him, and like I'm not gonna spoil anymore, but like he is very much still a part of the show. So literally, I don't like. This is one of those things where I'm like, the people who get mad, who are getting mad about this, are so absolutely absurd. I don't know what to say. Um, so yeah, there's that, and like, okay, so the other characters, I don't know very much about them, but like one of the characters that actually was very, it was something they did something with one of the characters that was really interesting. Is the character of Orko. So what I do know about He-Man is that Orko is this like little sorcerer kind of dude who is like kind of the comic relief, like butt of the joke character. And they actually do something really interesting with that in this, where they sort of like, where Orko like knows that he was like the butt of the joke and like people thought he was useless all the time. And that like now in the future, that like kind of got to him. And he's like, everyone thinks I suck. And like, it's like, and I'm just like, wait, this is actually like a really smart idea. So that was actually really cool what they did with that. And so that's fun. And then of course we have, you know, it's, of course, the main villain here is Skeletor, which is voiced by Mark Hamill, and that's just a shitload of fun. So, you know, the first part of the show is kind of, like, decent to, like, in terms of the story and characters or whatever, in terms of what's happening. It's nothing super great in terms of the first half. The first half is solid, kind of standard, but it works for what it is. The second half, things go fucking nuts. And this show goes from sort of like a standard, sort of fine show to just something completely off the walls and really fun. Like, the action of this and what happens, and just the absurd power scaling of what happens gets so ludicrous that I kind of love it. Like, again, as someone who has no connection to this show whatsoever, I ended up enjoying this, especially the second half, way more than I thought I would. And I would not have watched this if it weren't for all of those people bitching about how woke it was online. And this is, like, the most not woke thing I've ever seen. It's so just standard, you know, heroes go find things to make them stronger and then beat up bad guy thing. Like, that's what it is, and it's just, people just got mad because, apparently, because He-Man dies, and because, the main character is a muscular woman who has, like, a half-shaved head, and, like, that's it. It's like, that's it! Like, people got so mad about it, so I'm just like, oh my god, you people are so ridiculous. And you're the only reasons I watched the show, and I had a lot of fun with it. So, again, it's not complex. I'm sure you could pick this apart so much if you wanted to, but I had fun. And so that's the most I can say about it. So, fuck it, 8. I don't care. Whatever. I just thought this was fun, and all you people complaining about this in terms of it being woke are completely ridiculous and silly. So, yep. That's all I have to say about that. Anyway. Another show that I wasn't originally going to watch, but I ended up doing so, mostly this one because just a lot of people were praising it, was Invincible. Now, the reason why I was not really going to watch Invincible was because I'd seen a clip of a fight scene, and it's fucking brutal. This show is hard for me to watch. This show is so violent and vicious that it is actually hard for me to watch. And I watched The Boys this year, and that's also pretty far up the line, but this might even be even worse for me than The Boys, even though it's animated. It's viciously brutal, and if you're not into that at all, don't watch this show. Now, that said, they do use the violence to sort of prove a point. The point is still shock value, but the shock value makes sense for the story and the characters of what's going on. So, I get it, but it's still really hard just for me to see. So, there's that. Now, the plot is, I think, overall, probably the best part. This is the main plot, right? Sort of the mystery of, well, Omni-Man, okay? Sort of what is his deal, what's going on with him, why are things progressing the way they are. And the other stuff is decent. I think the performances, like the voice actor performances, especially like the main character, Mark, is good. So that stuff is good, but the characterization is sort of fine. It's one of those, like, oh, the high school kid has to, you know, hide his identity as a superhero, and, like, it's not poorly done, but it's just the same stuff we've seen over and over again, so it's like, how much, you know, can we really talk about for this? So, again, it's fine. So there's that, and I will say the reveal of what the actual sort of overall thing is feels kind of weak, in terms of, like, oh, like, I don't know, I thought it would be more. I thought there'd be more of a reveal in terms of, like, oh, it's actually, like, it's something that's more nefarious or more deep, and it's just sort of not that. So, I don't know. Like, I do overall like it, especially the story, but at the same time, because of how gruesome it is, this was hard for me to watch. And it's one of those things where, like, I'm kind of curious to see how the story continues, but I also don't really know if I want to stomach watching any more of this, so... I don't know. So, like, yeah, I totally understand why some people do, like, really like this. Especially if the violence is, like, not too much for them. So I get that. But it is a lot for me. So I don't really know. I will give it an 8, largely for what it is. But again, the in terms of the plot and again the characterization, but it is very gruesome, and so even though I am giving it an 8, which is something that I said that I would recommend people check out, I'm recommending this again with a big disclaimer, and also part of that being I don't even know if I want to continue watching it myself. So I don't know. I definitely see why some people really like this, but I'm not exactly there all the way. Okay. Next up, here's a show which looks not great, and ended up actually being pretty damn good. And that's Inside Job. So Inside Job looks like it's one of this kind of standard, more kind of modern adult animated comedy thing of like kind of, you know, gross out jokes and like sexual jokes and like, you know, sort of Family Guy, Rick and Morty kind of rip-off thing or whatever. And it's not that. It's definitely in a similar kind of vein, but it definitely is actually good, for one. And so the premise of this is that, you know, basically all of the sort of standard conspiracy theories are actually real, and there is this, like, shadow government organization controlling everything, and the main character is sort of a researcher sort of person who is in charge of, you know, handling a lot of stuff in this organization, and she has this team working under her, and, you know, all this kind of stuff, and there's some interesting character interaction, and the whole thing about how, like, I saw some people say, oh, the main character whose name is Reagan, which I'm wondering if that's a joke at you know, at the former president, but whatever, is that she, you know, she seems to be like Rick, where she's like the scientist that hates people or whatever, and it's like, if you want to think of it like that, then sure, but like definitely what they do with her character is definitely different than what they do than what Rick and Morty people are doing with Rick. So if you watch the shows, you know, as together, even though there are definitely similarities, they do not feel like they are the same character. So there's that. And I think that they, you know, take advantage of the premise. They have fun with it, you know, in a lot of different ways. This is a show where I'm kind of curious. Like, I talked about Harley Quinn last year, and I was like, this show is the humor is very much like 2020 millennial humor. This is also very much like 2021 millennial humor. So this is something where I'm like, I wonder if someone were to watch this like 10 years later, if they would just find it like super cringy and annoying. I don't know. Because I'm seeing it now. So we'll see how that, you know, goes for now. But again, as of now, I think it works. You know, characters are simple enough, but, you know, I think overall it's pretty enjoyable. The episodes themselves are mostly self-contained. There isn't really an overall plot. It's more just sort of overall development that happens. There is a very loose thread that kind of goes throughout everything, but even then, it's not really, you know, the end of season 1. Well, I guess it is sort of a climax based on what was set up earlier, but not really. So, you know, it is episodic, which is kind of nice, since there's been a lot of serialization of stuff. But yeah, I think like for season 1, this does a pretty damn good job setting things up and doing some interesting stuff with characters, having some fun times, and taking advantage of the premise. So yeah, I like this. And again, it's not just sort of a dumb, you know, Rick and Morty clone. So, yeah, I'll give Inside Job again another solid 8. So, yeah, I think it works quite well for what it's trying to be. And then we have Arcane. I'm just going to say right now, Arcane is the best thing I saw this year. Arcane was the best thing I saw this year, and I have no connection with League of Legends. I don't know shit about it. All I know, like, there's a small handful of characters where if you showed me, like, a picture of them, I'd be like, oh yeah, them, right? But, like, that's it. I don't know anything else. I have no idea, like, if the story in this show is actually based on some, like, story in the game. I have no clue, right? And even those handful of characters that do recognize, only one of them is even in this show. So, yeah. But Arcane is the best thing I saw this year. And I don't really want to say anything about this show. Like, I came into the show knowing, like, a one-sentence summary, and even that I kind of wish I didn't know. So I'm not going to say anything about the plot of the show or the characters or anything, just that it is very good. and that everyone should go watch this. It is, of course, animated extremely well, and it's, you know, the actual visual quality of the animation is really, really solid, but also has what I'm kind of calling like Spider-Verse edits, where basically you have these sort of like 2D edits kind of spliced into, you know, the overall 3D CGI aesthetic, and it works really well here in terms of showing this kind of chaotic stuff that happens, and that's done really well. Again, the characterization is interesting, it's, you know, done well, and, you know, I started this, you know, I started watching it and I was like, for episode 1, this is good, I'm interested, seeing where things are going. Episode 2, it's good, seeing where things are going. Episode 3, holy shit, this is now amazing. Like, if you have any doubts, watch the first 3 episodes. When you get to the end of episode 3, if you're still like, I don't know, then okay, fine, but I question your judgment if you get to the episode 3 and you are not super invested, because end of episode 3 is, wow. So, yeah, it's very, very good. And the actual ending of the show, of season 1, is like, damn, okay, season 2, we'll see how things go for there. So, yeah, there's definitely going to be a continuation of this. I think they've already confirmed it, although I think they've also said it's not going to be until 2023, which is a bit disappointing, but, I mean, if you gotta take your time to make it good, then take your time to make it good, so, okay. I've been waiting for season 4 of Dragon Prince for, you know, since 2019, so... you know, I can wait. That's it, though. I am kind of curious to see, again, I mentioned there's other characters I do recognize from League, but that are not in the show, and they also seem to be from, like, kind of a completely different sort of scenario, so I'm curious if they're ever gonna kind of get into that, like, some kind of completely different situations that are not involved with this main plot. I don't know. And also, what I thought of is, like, because this show got, like, really popular. And a lot of, you know, because again, I already talked about this earlier, there's this stigma that animation equals for kids. And this was definitely something where a lot of adults got into this, and you know, so I'm wondering, oh, and also, because there's kind of been this whole thing about, you know, video game movies are shit, right? Which the vast majority of them are. But there really haven't been many video game shows. And I think that video game shows have a lot more potential because the pacing of a video game story is generally, I think, fits better for a show than for a movie. So I'm wondering now if there's going to be, obviously, other companies sort of take notice of how successful this was and try to make their own sort of show. Like, the immediate thing that pops into my head is Overwatch, right? This seems like something that's very similar, where you have all of these different characters that have their own clear design and personality, and they're clearly connected in some way. Could you make a show out of this? Sure. Right now, I know Blizzard has problems right now, but you know, that was the immediate thought, and there's probably other things that could work too. I know there is like a Dota show, I believe, but I don't really know anything about it, and I didn't see it this year, so I have no idea how that's a thing. But yeah, I feel like this could work. For example, I've said for a while, I'm like, they could totally make the stories of Xenoblade 1 and 2 into anime. So, you know, I don't know. So, but it's just a thought that I'm like, this is actually something that could be really, really promising for the future of, you know, animated projects, both either in terms of video game stories or also in terms of just, like, you know, animated things made for adults that's not just like a comedy. So, yeah, like, this is almost a 10. This is, I said something that was almost a 10. This is almost a 10. It's a 9, and pretty much the only reason I'm not giving it a 10 is because I feel weird giving a show a 10 after just season 1. Right? Like, that just feels weird to me. So, I don't know. Like, so again, if this continues, the quality it's been going, this is shaping up to totally be a 10. But it could also drop the ball, so we'll see. We'll find out in 2 years, I guess. But yeah, Arcane, extremely good. Go watch it. Even if you don't think nothing about League, it's very, very, very good. Go watch Arcane, please. Do that. And then, okay, last Western show this is the last sort of new show that I saw. This is something that I only actually saw like a week and a half ago, is Maya and the Three. Now, this is something which is, the story of this is pretty basic. It's the whole, you know, there is a chosen one from a prophecy that has to go out and sort of recruit warriors to help fight against the big bad evil being or whatever. And as a story, it works fine, right? It's well enough, characters work well enough, you know, it's not anything super amazing, it's fine. Though, surprisingly, like, there's a pretty high body count in this show, and not just in terms of, like, random, you know, mooks or whatever, but I mean like actual like named characters. So like okay, that's kind of something. But what definitely elevates this is the visuals. This has a great design, both in terms of character design and also culture design, because this is all based on, Latin American sort of mythology stuff, and it takes that design really, really well. And this is definitely sort of an aesthetic and mythology that like isn't really touched upon in media a lot. So I think this is really, really cool that they're doing this. And because it sort of reminds me of like Latin American like Avatar, but like because again also the Maya goes to these different kingdoms or whatever, but instead of like different elements, they have like different like fighting styles. Like there's the archers and like the wizards and like the barbarians, so it works, and like but definitely the visuals are the thing that put this over the top and to go from like sort of a standard good to a better than standard good. And not just the design, but also the action is also done quite well. It's a bit silly in terms of how like not realistic the action is, but I think if you just kind of embrace what it is, you can have an enjoyable time and see pretty things moving around in your face, and have a decent story and stuff to go with it. I will say the pacing is a little weird, especially the first half. It seems like pretty fast, but again, overall product works quite well. Visuals help bump it up. Again, I'm gonna give this an 8. lots of 8s in this part, but I said things are pretty consistent, so yeah. I think it all, we've done a good job with that. Okay, now finally we're all ready to move on to older shows that came out a while ago that I decided to watch this year. And the first of these I watched is Total Drama. Now, the poster I believe that I have linked up with this image here is for Total Drama Island, and I was actually not 100% sure how I wanted to approach this. Did I want to approach this as one show with multiple seasons that are all different, or multiple shows that are all sort of connected over the same umbrella? And I'm ultimately viewing this as one show with multiple seasons, partly because that's how Wikipedia talks about it. So I did watch all 7 seasons of Total Drama, and if you don't know about this, it's basically sort of an animated sort of spoof of like kind of reality shows like Survivor and stuff like that. And the premise is fun. And definitely the character interaction is stuff that you can, because it's animated, you can go further with it than you could in real life. So it's a fun premise. It really comes down to just do the character interactions and the character writing, does that hold up? And for Island, for the first season, it does. So that's definitely something that they do quite well. I will say the show does have a fair amount of like gross out humor. This is true for like all the seasons, but I think I don't know, maybe it was most sort of unexpected in the first season that I watched, which is like a bit much at times. So I will kind of get on them with that. But again, I think overall Island is quite good. It does sort of hold everything together in a way that's pretty satisfying. So Island I like quite well. Now Action is they sort of take the characters out of the island and they go to sort of like a movie set or whatever, and it's based off a lot of movie parodies, and it is weaker. And I think it's largely, again, the character dynamics are weaker. It feels like, for example, of course there's drama with these characters, but in the first season the drama felt like, even though the characters are kind of ridiculous caricatures of sort of stereotypes, the drama that we see actually feels like kind of reasonable and like, okay, I can kind of see these characters for who they are getting into these situations. For Action, it doesn't feel realistic. Like, for example, Trent is like kind of done like super dirty in Action. I think like basically what they have him go through is something that doesn't really make sense. So it feels like forced and weird. So it's not as good. It's not like bad, but it's definitely a pretty noticeable step down from Island. World Tour is, well, as you can see from the name, they start traveling all around the world, and it adds to the location. It sort of spices things up a bit there, but again, the improvement is mostly the character interaction, namely through Alejandro. So he's a new character introduced, and he's just kind of fun as like he's sort of an antagonistic character in this season, and I think he works quite well for that. So he is good with that. But there's another character introduced, Sierra, and I really don't like Sierra. I talked about it. So I made one of the videos I made early this year was sort of a Total Drama character tier list, and Sierra, I talked about her then. I do not like her at all. I found her super annoying, and the fact that she's in so much of this season ultimately makes it so that this season, even though some of it I think is better than Island, I cannot say it's better than Island because of Sierra. Sierra definitely pulls the season down for sure. It's still overall better than Action, but yeah, Sierra really brings it down. And oh yeah, there's also like singing that happens in the episodes. I don't know, it's fine, I guess. I don't really care too much. Um, so there's that. Oh yeah, so Action brought in this thing called like the after party, which is sort of like characters sort of riffing on, you know, what happens to characters afterwards. And like in Action, I think it's kind of but in World Tour, I like it more, largely because you have this character Blanley who gets involved, and Blanley's just like such a shithead that like it makes it more entertaining when people just like, you know, screw with her. So that kind of helps with that. So again, I like World Tour more than Action, but I think Island overall works better in that sense. So there's that. And so then fourth season we had Revenge of the Island, and this one is just sort of okay. We have a brand new set of characters, which I think was a good idea to have a brand new set of characters, and some of them are annoying, but most of the annoying ones are gone pretty quickly, mostly. And overall, it's just sort of like a fine. The season's fine. You know, there's some characters where it's like I kind of like what they're doing with you, but they don't go too far. For example, like there's a character Zoe who I overall like as a character, but I feel like they sort of could go further. There's the thing with Dakota, which I actually kind of liked, but again, it was just sort of like they just kind of stop with her after like 2/3 of the way through, and that's it. So, this is a shorter season. It's only 13 episodes, I believe, whereas like the previous stuff was like 20 plus. So there's that. How the fact they have the island as like, you know, basically like all screwed up and like kind of like as like nuclear waste or whatever, I think was part of it, is like, you know, it's something. I don't know. So Revenge of the Island is decent. Not too much to say about that. Then season 5 was actually split in half. So, oh yeah, I think I said 7 seasons. Technically, it's 6 seasons. Well, whatever. Anyway, we have All Stars and Pocket Island. So, All Stars, I've seen a lot of people say they don't like All Stars, and I think I know why, and I also think I know why I kind of liked All Stars. It's because I think most people saw All Stars as, well, like All Stars, where it's like, let's take the best characters from the first run and the best characters from the second run, have them interact with each other, and, you know, do great stuff with that. I saw it as more like just as kind of a continuation of Revenge of the Island. And as a continuation of Revenge of the Island, I think it works quite well. I think, you know, it builds off of some stuff that, you know, is established there, and, you know, especially namely with like Mike and Zoe, I think that's done quite well. So that's done well. I do think that, yeah, the older characters are definitely not really utilized that well, so I can see definitely people getting pissed off about that. And the pacing is a bit weird because it is again another short season, so there is that too. I don't know. Ultimately, I liked All Stars, but I could see why. I understand why some people definitely don't. So there's that. Pocatello Island though is not good. Like, you know, I said before, like some of the characters are annoying, but they're gone pretty quickly. Half of the characters on Pocatello Island I actively dislike, and most of the ones that remain I just don't care about. So the only character that I really cared about at all was Scarlet, because I'm like, there's clearly something going on with you that I think is actually could be maybe interesting. And then when they reveal what that is, it's just like, oh, okay, whatever. So yeah, and one of the most annoying characters in all of this is not only in this season, but is in the season almost all the way through. And which is why I think they are ultimately end up being my least favorite character, because they're just in so fucking much of the show. So it's just, I can't. It was just so used so poorly. Again, so many of the characters, if they're not annoying, they're just who cares, blank, boring, who cares. So yeah, Pocatello Island is not good. And lastly, we have Redonkulous Race. So this is sort of a spin-off, which is, again, instead of it being like Survivor, it's based on The Amazing Race. And I like Redonkulous Race. The fact that they have teams, and it's also not, it's teams, and they're not all teens, is helpful in terms of making the cast feel more diverse, and also the character actions more interesting, because you have, like, you know, sort of older dad with like a tween son that's like a fun dynamic. You have, of course, like friends, you have siblings, you have romantic partners as like these dynamics. Like I that helps sort of make the characters more diverse and makes the interactions more interesting, and it helps separate out from just like another total drama season. So because of that, I actually like this season the most. This is actually my favorite season out of all of them, is Redonkulous Race. I just think it's works really well. It is, you know, it's more, I think there's sort of an intensity in terms of what happens that I think the other seasons don't really have. and I actually like this quite a lot. So, yeah. I will say there's two things to mention. Is first of all, it seems that like each season basically had like two different endings. Basically, you get to like sort of the final two, and then there's the ending where one of them wins, the ending where another one wins. So I saw, I watched these these through Netflix. However, when I watched the Netflix ones, it didn't have all of the seasons. Specifically, it did not have World Tour or Revenge of the Island. For some reason. So I had to go find those elsewhere. So I'm not 100% sure, and I don't really want to spoil which endings I saw because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it. But yeah, I will say, in Redonkulous Race, I might be a little bit biased because my favorite team is the one that ended up winning. So there's that. But yeah, overall, it's a mixed bag, right? So if I was to sort of rank the seasons, Redonkulous Race number 1, then Island, then All-Stars and World Tour are about the same for me. So I honestly, I would probably put All-Stars above World Tour, which is going to piss some people off. Largely because, again, Sierra in World Tour is just so annoying. She is in All-Stars, but she's much less of a prominent role, so it's not as bad. Then Revenge of the Island and Action are also about the same, and then Pagate Island is below. So if I was to compare all of them together, I think on average it gets a high 7. But in terms of, I say Island and Redonkulous Race, for example, I'd give 8s. So those I would give 8s. And I would say, if you're curious about this, haven't seen it before, watch Island, watch season 1, and then from there, see where you want to go, right? If you just are like, that was pretty fun, I might want to see one more, then I would say then just skip to Redonkulous Race. But if you want to see more, then yeah, you could see the others. I would just say just don't watch Pagate Island. Just don't. I don't care. It's not very good. Just skip it, and it's something. But overall, I'd give the whole thing a 7. Now, another sort of mid-late 2000s show that actually went on to the 2010s that was very popular that I never saw was Phineas and Ferb. And this show doesn't give a fuck when it comes to like realism and stuff like that. And honestly, I think that's kind of great. This show has just so much fun with its premise of here's these kids that are really smart and can build whatever they want and just do whatever they want. And why not? And so they go very far with that. And the thing is, like, the show is very repetitive because every character has not only their own role, which they continue, having throughout the show, but like they even have the same like sayings constantly throughout the time, and there's kind of a whole meme about different characters saying the same thing every episode. But like it's enjoyable with how repetitive it is. I don't know, like I think the writing is also funny enough where you don't really care. So yeah, there's that. And like, okay, there's no episode or moment that I would say is like fantastic, but the overall quality of the show is just quite high, where I just sort of enjoyed watching it. There wasn't any one moment where I was like, oh my god, I love the show. It was just, I watched the whole thing and I never felt bored. I was entertained thoroughly through it all, and yeah, I think that works. If I had to pick favorite characters, definitely Doofenshmirtz, and actually probably Candace are actually my favorite characters, largely because they're kind of similar and that they both are just kind of pathetic. But like, I don't know how they play with it. It's fun. So yeah, but it's a fun show. And if I had any complaint, it would be there are some side characters I wish they went into a bit more, namely Vanessa. Vanessa, I think, is a really interesting character and a fun character, but she's kind of sidelined a lot of the time. So there's that. And there's the songs that are in the shows, and again, I'm not a huge fan of like this kind of songs like this, but for these kinds of songs, I think that they do a good job. I can see why people who are into this kind of stuff do really like them. They're not my thing, but they're not like so bad that they're like bringing the quality of it down. So yeah, it's definitely one of these shows where like it feels like they could keep making episodes forever based on what they're doing, and they didn't. They stopped, and it's something where it's like, do I wish there was more? Yeah, but I mean, at least they're not making, on like season 25 or whatever. So maybe it's better that they did stop. I don't know. But overall, Phineas and Ferb, I'm going to give a high 8. I think it was really enjoyable, and I'm glad I watched it. So yeah, definitely see why some people who are, a couple years younger than me really got into the show and really liked it. So, yeah. Now here's a show that I didn't watch, but was definitely like kind of airing when I maybe would have watched it, but I just, didn't watch it. And that was Danny Phantom. And first of all, fuck Butch Hartman. shitty person who's done a lot of shitty things, and don't want to go into it right now, but yeah, fuck you. But the show itself is solid. This is definitely not one of those shows where watching it for the first time now, I'm like, oh my god, this is a hidden gem that I missed. I don't feel that way. If I did watch this when I was growing up, I'm sure I would get really into this. It's decent. I like it. It's solid, decent show. The writing characterization is decent. What I do wish is that like there were some actual like long-term changes, which there isn't really. There's just sort of some powers that like Danny gets as, you know, the show progresses that he continues to use, but there isn't really any big, you know, character changing moments, which I kind of wish there were, but there isn't. So there's that. I've described it in my notes as like there's no real overall plot, but there is a continuity. So there's that. But yeah, I don't know. It's something where it's like it's fine. It works decently well enough. Again, it's something where I wish some of the side characters were focused on more. I have written down namely Danielle and Valerie. So there's that. In terms of the animation, again, I think it works pretty well. I do like how like when like a ghost shows up, they have this sort of shift in color, which I think is kind of neat. So there's that. And then another thing that was kind of weird though is that honestly, this is a weird thing to criticize, but like I find that the show has like a lot of really annoying sound effects. So they have like a lot of kind of cartoony sound effects that show up kind of seemingly at random, and they're like pretty distracting, honestly. But like overall, it's decent. I don't think this is some secret hidden gem that like everyone needs to see. But if you grew up watching this and you really like it, I understand why. So I'm gonna give it 7. It works. It's decent enough. You know, it's not like oh only kids would like this, but I don't think it's anything super amazing, fantastic. So there's that. However, a show that I have heard a lot of people say was really, really fantastic, which again, a show that I totally, you know, was the right age to watch growing up, but I just didn't, is Teen Titans. Now, I've heard that this is basically, you know, it's a show which is usually very kind of fun and goofy, but it has some very serious emotional moments. So I heard that going into it, and I agree, though I think it does take a bit of time to get there. The characters, of course, overall, they work really well with each other. The team dynamic is fun, and the characters do definitely have their own distinct personalities, which is what I've heard is kind of the main critic people have of like Teen Titans Go, which I have not seen. I'm not going to see it, but mainly I've heard that like all those characters kind of feel the same, so that's kind of the problem. That said, I do have 3 things to say that I think will probably get me in trouble with people who are like Teen Titans. The first is I kind of don't like Raven's voice at first. I think they basically make her like so like that I like can't really understand what she's saying at the time, and like I don't think it doesn't work too well. It gets better though, so that's one small criticism. And then let's see. Oh, here's that. Okay, so that's the first thing that people are gonna hate me about. The second thing is I don't like the opening. I find the opening song to actually be kind of annoying. So that's another thing I'm sure people are gonna criticize me over. And the third thing is the whole like anime faces that they have for a lot of reactions and stuff, I think is overdone. I get that that's sort of the point of the show, it's sort of aesthetic they're going for, but like, I don't know, there's a lot of times where it happens where it just feels like, why did that happen? So, again, ultimately, these are minor criticisms, right? What matters a lot more, of course, is the characters and the story. Again, characters overall, do a good job, and they definitely do have some serious moments, and, you know, the overall team dynamic is done really well. In terms of the plot, generally the seasons have sort of a main plot, which is like 5 or 6 episodes, but the rest of the season is sort of like kind of standard episodic filler, but I don't like using the word filler because filler implies bad, and they're not bad most of the time, but they are definitely not, you know, within the main plot. And, you know, that's fine. And something that I actually like in terms of like progression of the show is you get a sense of progression in how the characters fight. Because you can clearly see, at least when I did, because I watched through all of this in a relatively short period of time, that the characters do get better at fighting. And they sort of learn, even if they don't like, you know, Starfire, you have magically learned a new power. They don't really do stuff like that, but it's like they sort of figure things out and they sort of learn new techniques they do therefore utilize later. And it's a way that makes things pretty interesting in terms of, you know, having the stakes not feel like, because one problem with superhero stuff is that like, the character keeps getting beaten by new villains over and over again, and it's like at some point it's like, why do you keep losing to these people, right? Where here it's like you feel that like they're progressing, but also the villains are progressing too, and there's also new villains that challenge their new abilities and stuff. So that's done very well. It's a subtle thing, but I think it helps a lot in the long run. So there's that. Anyway, in terms of the actual specific seasons, so season 1 is good. This one focuses mostly on Robin and the characterization with Slade, and it's done quite well. Like honestly, I don't really care about Slade. What little I know about Slade from other stuff, I'm just like, you exist? Whatever, I don't care. But here, it works well. And he's not, like, a particularly interesting character, but the sort of, like, the voice, the presence is intimidating, and it works, especially, you know, building off of Robin, so it works well. Season 1 is good. Season 2 is also good, involving with Tara. And, you know, the plot involving with her has some decent emotions, and I think it's good there. I do wish there was maybe, like, 1 or 2 episodes of, like, that were sort of like normal episodes that had Tara involved as like part of the team, because they kind of skip over that. But overall, I think again season 2 does a good job. Season 3, I think the main plot of season 3 is a bit weaker, but in terms of the overall like the filler episodes, I think they're actually better. So it's sort of a weird thing where it's like the filler episodes are actually probably more interesting than the main plot, which is with Cyborg, I believe. Is that the Cyborg one? Yeah, it is. And which is just, it's decent. It's not, I don't know, it's not bad, but it's just sort of like, it's fine. Season 4, though, is the opposite, where I think a lot of the filler episodes of season 4 are kind of not that great, but the main plot with Raven and the whole that kind of situation is the best main plot. So, I don't know, right? It's, again, like, I don't know how to compare this. Season 5, though, is kind of weird. So, this is a season where they sort of leave the city and they go do stuff all around the world. And I think this would have worked better if it was 2 seasons. Because, as of now, it's just this 1 season, and they're like, oh, we're all around the world. And maybe it's because, again, I watched this just sort of, you know, over a few days, and not, you know, wasn't a kid watching this over, you know, several weeks or months. But when they come back to the city at the end of the season, it does like, oh, we've been away so long and so much has changed. And for me, it's like, this wasn't long at all. So I feel like if there was 2 seasons where they were sort of out in the world, it would work better in that sense. And actually, well, speaking of the ending, so the ending is one that I've seen a lot of people get annoyed at, and it's very strange ending. I don't really want to say too much again because of spoilers in case people haven't seen this yet. I mean, again, I hadn't, so, you know, who knows. But the emotions of the ending, I think, are actually really interesting. And it's a very bold thing to end on. I'm not sure if I'm super sold on it, but I don't think it's thought up bad. What's weird to me is how they introduced this like monster enemy thing, and they just never do anything with it. It's like, here's this thing, we don't know how to fight it. That's it. It's like, what? So like that part of it is weird, but the emotion of what's going on actually I kind of like. So I don't know. Like overall, I do like this more than Danny Phantom. Like, for example, if I watched this as a kid, I think I would like Danny Phantom. I think I would love this. I don't, as an adult, now watching this, but I am going to give it more credit than what I did for Danny Phantom. So, Teen Titans, I'm going to give an 8, and I think it's a pretty high 8, honestly. So this is definitely something where I can understand why this was a very popular thing for kids, especially when my age, when we were growing up. And it does a good job. So, yeah. In a similar vein, another superhero show from the 2000s, we have The Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, again, I don't really have any connection with Spider-Man. I've just seen most of the movies, and I like Tom Holland's Peter in the MCU a lot. There's that. But my point is, I'm not some big nostalgia person for Spider-Man, but I like the show. I think that it's a fun show. It's the quips and just some of the action or whatever. I wouldn't say it's necessarily funny, but it's definitely fun in terms of the scenarios and sort of what happens and how things build and stuff like that. So it's fun. The action is varied, and you like the characters as they sort of interact with each other. I like how the fighting it doesn't all feel the same. So when Spider-Man's fighting this villain, it feels different than when he's fighting another villain. So that works. And this show actually kind of reminds me, and this is going to sound weird, but let me explain. It kind of reminds me of Batman Beyond. And obviously not in terms of the setting, but in terms of the characters, because sort of the characterization of Terry in Batman Beyond is that he was kind of a bonehead, and that he kind of was obviously trying to balance school and superhero, but he was kind of a bonehead that he would get really stuck in his ways and just do not great decisions, but in a way that it's not frustrating because it's like you believe that he would make those decisions, even though it's kind of a dumb decision. Peter in this is pretty similar. He makes pretty poor decisions, especially regarding his sort of interactions and relationships with other characters, but it makes sense. It feels reasonable and relatable, so it works in that sense as well. And there's kind of, in terms of, and a lot of that has to do with like girls, right? And so there's sort of the three main girls of this show. There's Gwen Stacy, there's Mary Jane, and then there's this character Liz, who I think might be new to the show. I'm not sure, but anyway, Gwen Stacy works as sort of like, the shy, nerdy girl that, has known Peter all of his life or whatever. So it has like kind of a, secret crush on him or whatever. So that's, that kind of stereotype. Liz is sort of like the popular girl who, like, at first doesn't like Peter because he's like he's a nerd or whatever, but she kind of grows to like him as he ends up like helping her with things and stuff like that. So that I think it's an interesting interaction because it's so that like Liz is not just like, shitty person, but she is kind of superficial and definitely seems like she's not great for Peter. Even if though they are not, terrible with each other. But Mary Jane is actually really interesting in this show. I don't know if this is how she is portrayed in other things, but she's sort of portrayed as like, I'm hot and I know it, and like I'm going to use that to my advantage. Like, it's interesting how they portray it with that, because like how she interacts with everyone, it's like she knows that like a lot of the guys or whatever think she's really hot, but like she sort of uses that so that like hey, she knows they'll listen to her. And so she uses that to her advantage to do certain things, not in like a nefarious way, but in a way that's actually helpful. And it's like, I think this is really interesting. It's sort of like the kind of femme fatale kind of thing, but like not as a villain. And I'm like, this is actually a really interesting dynamic that I would be curious to see going forward. The problem is that this show, if you don't know, this show was canceled early. And yeah, basically the show was canceled after 2 seasons. There's only 26 episodes in total, and it is definitely canceled. This was like, season 2 ends in a way that like a season would end, but not a series would end. And it does hurt, because again, a lot of this character interactions, they are not completed, right? The character development is definitely not completed. This show did not finish. It's not a DuckTales situation where they were just sort of cut off early. But they still got to do their conclusion. No, they did not get to do their conclusion, and that sucks. Because I think this does have potential to be really good. And as of now, it's just for what we got. It's good. Again, I would give, for example, I'm giving Spectacular Spider-Man another 8. But again, this had potential to be even better, in my opinion. And this is really unfortunate. I think this definitely could be what should be something that hopefully could, well, I highly doubt this would get revived at this point. But it's unfortunate that it got canceled, because I think there was a lot of promise for this. So, yeah. And then, okay. Oh boy. I'm sort of preparing myself for what I have to talk about next. I watched all of Ben 10. Not just Ben 10, I watched all of Ben 10, Ben 10 Alien Force, Ben 10 Ultimate Alien, and Ben 10 Omniverse. This took about a month. And, oh boy. So, let's start with the original. Ben 10. This was something that I, like, saw advertisements for growing up, but, like, I thought it looked stupid, so I didn't watch it. So finally I decided to watch it, and it's solid. It's decent. It's another one where I'm like, it's, if I watched this as a kid, I probably would like it. And, it's sort of a low stakes kind of show, in terms of how it's presenting things. Again, of course, you have the kids of Ben and Gwen that sort of can be kind of annoying to sort of deal with each other, but it's annoying in a way that like feels kind of realistic. And they do develop, although it is quite slow, so it's something. In terms of the plot, of course, you have Ben being able to transform into all these aliens based on the sort of watch power or whatever. That does change a bit over the show. He does, for example, he gets some more aliens he can use, and also Gwen does get involved with certain things. She gets some sort of abilities, not alien-based. I don't know how much I want to say about this, because I have to talk about it for later shows. But yeah, so that helps to have her like involved with things, and it's also very clearly different. It's not just like, oh, she also gets aliens or whatever. So it's like, okay, that's fine. The show is very much episodic. Again, there is a continuity, but it's every episode is pretty much its own thing. There is season 3 sort of has an overarching plot, but it's pretty minimal, so there's not too much to say about that. Now, something that I actually got really excited about was the ending of the show, because the ending is a complete change to the status quo. And it's like, oh shit, okay, this is going to be really interesting and curious to see how this, is handled in future shows. They, like, don't bring it up. Yeah, so it's as if, like, the ending of the show doesn't happen. Like, it's just so, again, I don't know how to say this, not, saying spoilers, but it's just really frustrating and weird that, like, that happens like that. So I don't know why they did that. They just, like, pretend that the ending, like, doesn't happen for, like, future shows. So, okay, it's, I don't know. Overall, it's pretty good. It's not the best show ever, but doesn't really do anything poorly. It's what it is. I think it's fine. Now so in terms of, like, there were kind of some, like, movies that go along with this. There was The Secret of the Omnitrix, which was actually sort of as part of the TV show, and this sort of functions to me as, like, sort of an overall climax of the show. And in that sense, I think it works quite well. This is probably my favorite part of the original show, is the Secret of the Omnitrix thing. There is sort of a fake out that they do, which is, like, really obvious that it's a fake out. But yeah, as a climax, and, both in terms of the action but also the character growth or whatever, I think it works quite well. However, there is something, like, that they released noticeably later that's Destroy All Aliens, which is this, like, CGI movie, and, like, this doesn't really have a reason to exist. Like, the plot is honestly kind of similar to the beginning of Secret of the Omnitrix, honestly. What they do with it afterwards is different, but, like, this kind of seemed like just an excuse to have, like, the CGI aliens punch each other in the face. And, like, I mean, like, they do that, but I don't know. The story or characters is, like, whatever. So if you want to watch this or whatever and you haven't already, I would just not even bother watching Destroy All Aliens, but if you want curious about the show, and yeah, I mean, again, it's not phenomenal. It is an episodic thing with, kids as, 10-year-olds or whatever. I think, are they 10? I think they're 10. And, as that, it works pretty well. So, ultimately, I would give the original Ben 10 a solid high-ish 7. So, pretty good. Nothing super amazing, but worth for what it is. And then we got to Ben 10 Alien Force. Now, Alien Force is 5 years later, focusing on Ben, Gwen, and this guy Kevin, who was a minor character in the original show and is now sort of the third main character. I will say, having him be a part of the main trio is kind of weird. It does feel like it comes out of nowhere a little bit, and they just kind of needed... It's as if they had a character idea in their head of, oh, we want a character that acts like this, and they just happened to look through the, what characters did we have in the original Ben 10? Oh, Kevin, he will fit, and they kind of just stuck him in there for not really a great reason. So it is kind of weird, but I think overall the character dynamic between the three of them is overall done pretty well, especially in the first 2 seasons. So the first 2 seasons have this sort of overall plot where they're sort of trying to figure out what's going on with these sort of aliens that are on Earth that are doing something, and overall it's pretty good. But again, like I said though, the beginning of this show seems to completely ignore the very end of the last show. So I don't know what the deal is with that, and there's some stuff that, like, they just kind of don't explain. Again, like, not just with, like, the stuff with the Omnitrix, but also, like, stuff that Gwen used to be able to do that she doesn't do now. She does this other thing, which is, like, So again, there's kind of a weird thing with that doesn't really work. But because you have this sort of overall plot, I do think the plot and the characterization works better, at least from my point of view. I could see some people just not getting into this, considering that they did like the original show for what it was doing, but personally, I liked it a good amount, and I was actually willing to give Alien Force even an 8. And then we got to Season 3. Season 3 is kind of weird. So Season 3 is sort of after the climax has been solved for, Season 2, and what happens is basically, because Ben just saved the universe, he becomes, like, super cocky, and he's pretty annoying. Now, that said, the show acknowledges that he's annoying. The characters are commenting, like, dude, you're being an asshole, like, stop, right? And, like, so they know, and this could be something really interesting, where it's like he becomes super overconfident, and he thinks everything's going to go his way, but then he gets sort of, beaten down to earth or whatever, and he has to learn a lesson of humility to always, whatever, not be super whatever. That could be really good. But they don't really do that. They just have him just sort of be a jackass for, like, the whole season until you get to, like, the very last episode, and then it's like one thing happens and he's like, oh, I should have been, and then it's like, that's over. It's like, you really could have done this a lot better. So there's that, and yeah, it's the season 3 thing also, it's just like there's also that one episode about like it's like this whole anti-war episode where Ben is like hears that like these aliens are in this constant war, and he's just like, I'm gonna just go talk to them and tell them to stop. And it's like, okay, clearly, obviously, this is like not the whole episode. There's gonna be more to it than this. But like, no, that's pretty much what happens. He's like, I'm gonna go and tell them to stop, and they're like, no. And then he's like, what? They didn't listen to me. And it's just like, oh my god. So there's definitely dumber stuff in season 3, and it is pretty dumb. And I will say the ending of this show, like, it does feel like it was just sort of a transition of like, okay, we're gonna do Ultimate Alien now, and it's like, okay, so it's something where like the first 2 seasons, I honestly might even give it 8 out of 10, but with the third season, this is also still a 7 out of 10. If I had to pick, I would put this above the original, slightly just because of the first 2 seasons, but I could see people, disagreeing with that, and that's fine. But yeah, that was what we have for Alien Force. So, well, what about Ultimate Alien? Okay, so I haven't been really going over specific plot stuff because I actually think that, kind of recommend these episodes, so the shows, whatever, so far. So I haven't really been going over specific points because I don't want to spoil them. I'm going to be spoiling a lot of Ultimate Alien because I don't think Ultimate Alien is very good. And I want to specify why. So, yeah, specifically also Season 1. So, Season 1, Episode 2 is so bad that I was actually, actually cringing to myself, like, holy shit, this is actually terrible. Ben is, like, a total asshole to, like, so many people, and he doesn't understand that he's being an asshole, and it's just like, oh my god, you are so insufferable. And he's like, I want to do this thing for my girlfriend Julie, and like I also want to, go over here with this, do stuff with Kevin. I also want to hang out with Gwen. It's like, and he just speaks such a whiny bitch, and it's just like, oh my god, you're so insufferable. And he comes up with this idea because he has this alien. Is it? No, Echo, as the alien, where he can like sort of duplicate himself, and then he realizes that he can then sort of like turn back to normal, and so he has like multiple versions of himself, and it's like, okay, so that's how he solves the problem. But then what they do is they reveal that like, oh, each copy of Ben can turn into a different alien, and it's like, oh shit, that's like a really cool idea where you can actually have these sort of multiple aliens that can all fight at once. That's a super cool idea. I mean, this episode was dumb and annoying, but like they set that up, so that's cool. No, they just less than a minute, they're like, oh well, because we're all doing different things, we can't work together, so we can't do this, and they just take that away and they never address it again. So it's like you have this, you make me watch this episode where Ben's a shithead for the whole time. You set up this thing which could be really cool, and then you're like, nah, actually, we're not going to do that. It's just like, it was that was the worst episode of any of this by far, and it's just okay. So anyway, the overall plot of season 1. So this is a mess. So they're just screwing around on Earth, and then this alien guy Agregor shows up, and like the whole deal is that he's like captured these like other aliens that he's going to do for something. And I don't care. Like, Agregor is so whatever to me in terms of a villain. He exists, and he's fine. I'm a threatening evil guy, rah, and it's like, okay, whatever, bro. Like, I don't care. And so it's like 10 episodes or so where he's doing stuff on Earth, and stuff happens, and whatever. And, but then at the end, he gets this thing, and he's like, okay, now I'm gonna actually go into space and do this thing. And it's like, oh shit, they're actually gonna like follow him into space. And that hasn't really happened outside of the whole Secret of the Omnitrix thing in the original show. So like, okay, sure, we'll actually see some of these alien worlds. Like, that could be cool. So it's like, we're gonna go do that. But then the next episode, they're like back on Earth helping these like bully kids do a thing that doesn't matter. It's just, whatever. So the pacing is weird. And, but anyway, they do go up to space. They do some stuff, and you see some things with some aliens, which is kind of neat. But, like, some of it's also really stupid and doesn't make any sense. Like, there's the whole thing with, like, the fish planet, the fish people planet, that, like, somehow Ben uses goop to, like, hold the planet together. And, like, I don't know how that's supposed to work. It's just, like, he's just not good. He turns into goop and, like, goes to this thing that, like, apparently, like, scatters him throughout the water of the entire planet. So, like, oh, so he's dead. Or at least, like, goop is dead. But, like, no, he's not. And it's like, what? It just doesn't make any sense. So that's just weird. But then finally they eventually like do stuff, and they get to this thing called like the Forge of Creation, where Agregor is again gonna, I think he's supposed to like, he's gonna absorb the power of the fucking Alien X Celestial thing, which, Alien X is introduced in Alien Force. He like doesn't do anything very much in Alien Force, and it's like, okay, what are you gonna do with you? And I don't know. But they're here. And it's like, okay, and there's this whole thing about like how young Ben shows up through the Forge of Creation because of the time is weird, and like, you're like, okay, And then they spend like literally a solid minute of like young Ben talking about how older Gwen has like a big butt, and it's like, oh my god, why? What is happening? It's just not. And then okay, and then like once they finally get to Agricor or whatever, and they're sort of beating him up, like Kevin goes fucking like he's like like he pisses me off, I'm gonna kill him or whatever, and like so he goes to like kill him, and Ben's like, no, you can't do that, we can't kill people. Okay, this thing, and then like, but then like because Kevin's like, I'm like mad, and then like Ben all of a sudden is like, Kevin's too dangerous to be left alive, we have to kill him, and I'm like, what the fuck, like, what, huh? And but then like again, it comes out of nowhere, but then like it seems like they justify it because Kevin goes around like just draining people of energy for like no fucking reason, and like and Ben's like, oh my god, see, I was right, like we have to kill him, and it's like it gets like super edgy in terms of how they're presenting this for like no reason. And it's just, I don't know. The end of it is basically like, he gets saved, whatever, who cares? Like, that's the end of season 1. It's just like, that was a complete mess. And then season 2, like, nothing happens. Like, they just dick around for a while and nothing. There's like one episode that sort of sets up season 3, but like, that's it. Like, season 2 is completely forgettable. Now season 3, nice voice crack, is actually kind of interesting at first. You have this potential, of what they're doing with season 3, with like the overall plot. Basically, you have these sort of like knight characters. They're trying to prevent this like sort of eldritch demon thing from crossing over to their dimension, to the real dimension or whatever. And it's like, okay, this is actually not bad. It's how they have it as this like cult or whatever. And it's like, okay, this actually works decently well. The problem though is that there are 20 episodes of season 3. 7 of them are this plot. The rest of them are completely just other shit that doesn't matter. Now, that said, some of those filler episodes are actually kind of good. In fact, I would say the best Ben 10 episode out of all of them is Season 3, Episode 15, which is Catch a Falling Star. That is the best episode of all the Ben 10 stuff, and that is a filler episode of Season 3. But a lot of it's just not very good. And again, 7 out of 20 is a terrible ratio. Like, come on, like, yeah, it's just so bad. And so there's that, and it's just, whatever. And it's like, I don't know. Season 3, if you were to cut together just the actual important episodes of Season 3, it's actually pretty good. But I will say the very end, though, is stupid. It's a super anticlimax. It's like, okay, that's dumb. But overall, it's actually pretty good. Again, it's the overall thing with that. So, it's just like, I don't know, it's so weird in terms of the structure and the plot of it. Season 1 is a mess. Season 1 is a mess. Season 2, nothing happens. And then Season 3 is pretty good for a third of it, and then the rest of it is just who cares. So, oh, and notice, I have not mentioned the Ultimate Aliens once when talking about this. You know why? Because they're not important. They're not important to the fucking thing. Like, they show up, and they exist, and it's like, we're here, and it's like, okay, and they sometimes are, you know, he fights with them, and I don't know, like, they exist. They're okay, and I'm kind of glad they're not just like instant wins, because I was afraid that might kind of happen like that, but they just come off as so not important that it's like, who cares? So, yeah, there's that. I don't know what else to say about them. Like, and also just in general, the writing is noticeably worse than Alien Force, both in terms of like the storylines and also just like the characterization. It's a clear step down, and I don't get it because from what I gathered, it's like, it seems like the same people worked on Alien Force's Ultimate Alien, so I don't know what happened, that there's a clear drop in quality, but it happens. So, yeah, and Ben is just a whiny asshole for like most of the show. So, yeah, I don't really like Ultimate Alien very much. Like, again, there are some episodes that are decent. Again, like the overall season 3 plot, I don't know. It's just, I'm going to be super generous and give this a 5. But again, this, like how Genlock season 2, I said like 4 at best, but probably maybe a 3. This is like a 5 at best, maybe a 4. It's not very good. If you are going to watch this at all, I would say, again, basically watch sort of the season 3 plotline, which, so again, season 2, episode 7 is sort of the setup for that. And then you have season 3, episode 1, season 3, episode 4, season 3, episode 10 and 11, and then season 3, episode 18, 19, and 20. Okay, those are the main plot. Overall, if you watch those episodes, it's pretty decent. That said, the very end is stupid. Okay, so there's that. But yeah, overall, Ultimate Alien is just kind of a mess. And then we get to Omniverse. Omniverse is sort of seems kind of like a, not really a reboot, but sort of like a restart in a sense, because they sort of, the plot is not a continuation of Ultimate Alien. I mean, it is technically, but like not, in terms of how it's presented. It's sort of, it comes off as its own thing, and it almost feels like they're trying to just be a direct sequel to the original show. But this clearly does take place after Alien Force and Ultimate Alien in terms of the characters and stuff like that. So okay, fine. But the plot definitely changes because instead of it being, Ben, Gwen, and Kevin, it's about Ben teaming up with this sort of alien guy named Rook. And Rook is fine. He's sort of the stereotypical of, like, I am an alien that doesn't really have emotion and doesn't understand Earth customs. And it's like, okay. It's how many times has that been done? So, I don't know. Like, people often complain about, like, the art style being different. And, like, yeah, I mean, it's different. Some things about it are weird, like the fact that the humans like tend to not have pupils is kind of weird. But like overall, I don't know, it's kind of a wash to me. Some characters I think actually look a little bit better, but others are worse. So, I don't know. It's just sort of not super important to me. I will say Ben's characterization is better here than it was at least in Ultimate Alien. Like he's still cocky, but he's just not like a straight up asshole. So okay, it works fine in that sense. But yeah, I will say. With this show feels like it's trying to kind of be a meme, like it's trying to be like, we have like meme humor and stuff. Like there's like some lines that are said, and like they have that like that fucking like goat scream thing that was around, like that happens like 20 times in the show. It's very frequent, and it's pretty distracting, honestly. So there's that. Again, as I said with other things, like there are some side characters that I wish were focused on a bit more. The main one being Esther, who I think is actually kind of a fun character, but instead we get like other stuff and like the fucking Vriedel brothers, who are like so dumb, and I'm like, why are there like a dozen episodes on you guys? I don't give a shit. So there's that. In terms of the seasons, the first 4 seasons, they generally follow like sort of a very vague plot involving this sort of group of villains doing stuff. It's all right. I don't even remember who all the villains are at this point. And, it's fine. Nothing too spectacular in that way or the other. Season 5 is sort of like, it's basically like every episode is kind of a riff on different like horror stuff. Again, it's fine. It's at least the aesthetic is kind of different, and what they're doing with it is kind of, it's almost like the Halloween special episode. It's like a Halloween special season, which is like, okay, it's fine. Nothing super interesting in that sense. Season 6 though, is actually kind of interesting. Is that it's focused on sort of, so again, the whole organization of that is fighting aliens during all of this is the plumbers. They're supposed to protect Earth or whatever. And so instead here in season 6 we have this organization. I think they're actually supposed to be sort of a group within the plumbers called the Rooters, and they're kind of like they're seen as, there's the very basic way of describing them is evil plumbers. So that's not really fair to call them that. And there's actually some decent stuff done with this, particularly. One of the criticisms that I have with the whole Alien Force, Ultimate Alien stuff about Kevin is actually explained in this in a way that's actually kind of clever. So season 6 is actually decent. Is pretty good. And then we have season 7 and 8, and the whole thing is, it's the finale seasons that have basically with a main big bad villain of Malturant, who is this guy who can like control time, and his whole thing is that he wants to start this time war, and it's like, okay, well, shit, time war sounds cool, so like, all right. Even if some of the characterization is not great, at least we get a time war. We don't. There's like no time war. There's like a small fight like once and like or twice, and like that's it. It's like I talked about the anticlimax of season 3 of Ultimate Alien, and like there is that anticlimax, but that's at the very end after they already had like a decisive battle. They like don't have one here. It falls so flat, and it's like I was promised a time war. Like where the fuck was my time war? Like it's just so overall, I don't know, like, it has a similar problem with Ultimate Alien being, like, there is so much filler. Again, there are 80 episodes of Omniverse, and so much of it is filler, and it's just, I don't think the characters are interesting enough to make it, well, interesting. It's fine. Again, if I watched this as a kid, I'd probably like it overall, but I don't know. Omniverse is going to get a 6. It's at least a little bit more, it's more consistent than Ultimate Alien, so it's something, but it's just it kind of goes in one ear and out the other, to be honest. So, yeah, that's that. I don't know. And then one more thing I want to talk about is something that actually I believe started airing or being released in 2019 or 2020, and this is another superhero thing. This is something that I kind of was like not sure what if I don't think you really would call this a show. It's more like a series of specials that are collectively known as Marvel Rising. So these are basically a collection of specials focusing on sort of teen Marvel superheroes, like for example Spider-Gwen and Ms. Marvel and Squirrel Girl and characters like that. And this basically feels like someone at Marvel was like, hey, let's do Young Justice, but like not as serious. And for that, it works fine, right? It's not, I don't think it's phenomenal. There are definitely some characters like Squirrel Girl I find to be like right on the border of like you're too annoying for me to like you, but you're like right on the edge of that. But overall, it works. I will say the animation is a little rough at times, so that's kind of something that's like a little eh. So there's that. In terms of like what the specials are, let's see. We have like a super quick thing called Initiation, which is basically just sort of setting up some future stuff, so there's not really much to talk about that. But the main sort of event, which is the main, it's like, this one I think actually is like an hour and a half kind of movie, quote unquote, is Secret Warriors. And it mostly focuses on, Squirrel Girl, Ms. Marvel, and sort of bringing the team together to fight against a thing. And again, it's solid, decent, not too much to say about it. It works with that. And then we have Chasing Ghosts, which is the next sort of thing that kind of follows after this. This is when you get Spider-Gwen kind of into the mix. There's this sort of plot involving her. It is a bit short, but again, it's decent, does what it needs to do. Then you have Heart of Iron, which introduces Ironheart, who again, decent, not too much to say about that one. Then we have this thing called Battle of the Bands, which is like really stupid, but like in a way that's kind of fun. Like it's really dumb. Where it's like, again, you have like people play like like Spider like Gwen is in this band, and it's like I don't know. It's one of the things like why do I? It's like I don't care about this, but it's like so weirdly dumb and like I don't know. It's just it's like it's just kind of stupid, but I don't dislike it for being stupid. But then we have Operation Shuri, which this is probably my least favorite one. It's a pretty standard plot, and like the whole thing with this is that like Shuri is just like way better at them all, and it's like okay, whatever. I don't know. This is probably the weakest one. And then the last one is Playing with Fire, and it involves more characterization with this character named Dante, who like he was in some previous stuff, but he wasn't very important. And this one is just fun because the villain in this is like this villain is kind of family, and they're just so fucking weird that like it's fine to be funny. They're just kind of they're just hilarious in how they just like shit on each other. It's just I don't know, like overall like the whole thing is just sort of like decent. There's not too much to say about it. It's a fun little sort of distraction for it's like a couple hours worth of content. It's definitely not as good as Young Justice overall, again, because I think Young Justice writing is generally better, and the animation is better, and the plot is better, but like it's not bad. It's fine. So overall, this whole Rival Rising stuff as a whole, I'll give it 7 out of 10. Kind of on the lower end of a 7, but it's a 7. It's fine. So, and with that, we are done with the Western shows. We still have now to move to anime. Now this should not take nearly as long as what we've already talked about, because I only have a small handful of these that I actually watched this year. First of all, though, is going to be a new season of something I watched last time, and that was season 2 of Beastars. Now, if you remember from what I said last year about Beastars, I said that Beastars was very good. And like, well, I said it was an 8, right on the border of being a 9. And as long as they continue to do what they're doing, this could totally become a 9. Well, they didn't really. Season 2 is a bit of a step down from Season 1. And it's still overall pretty good. Characterization is done quite well, mostly with Legoshi and Louis. But the biggest issue I have is that Haru is kind of sidelined, and she's really not in the show very much. And that was my favorite part of Season 1, was the characterization and the sort of relationship, that happens with Legoshi and Haru. And that's not really in the show very much for the second season. The main plot of this is basically sort of picking up on something that was in the beginning of Season 1 with the murder of Tem, right? That was something that happens at the beginning of Season 1. And that specifically has kind of gone into more for this season, which is fine. I think that works decently well. It was something that should have been explored, but I just wish Haru was more involved in the overall story. And hopefully, now that story involving Tem's murder has been solved at the end of Season 2, we can actually progress more with Haru into Season 3. Now, I thought I read somewhere that the manga actually keeps moving away, from Haru, which I hope is wrong, or maybe the anime can just do something different from that. I don't know. I still like season 2. I'm still gonna give season 2 an 8, but it's a low 8, whereas season 1 was like a very high 8. So hopefully things will get better. Again, it's still a good show. I like it overall, but I hope this quality doesn't keep going down. So we'll see how that goes with that. Now, next up is something that I've talked about twice so far, and that is Great Pretender. Right, we had a show Sunday about Great Pretender way back at the beginning of the year, and we talked about it a bit during our retrospective earlier in the week. So there's not too much I have to say about this. It's very good. Characterization is great. Animation is great. Music is great. Plot is great. It's all really, really good. Go watch Great Pretender. 9 out of 10. There. Boom. Move on. And in fact, I'm going to move on to something that I saw a trailer for last year, and I completely forgot about it until I happened to see it pop up on Netflix again. This is something called Eden. I believe it was originally called Eden 3. And this is... it's only 4 episodes, so it's very short. And it's honestly how the pacing of the episodes works. This basically feels like it's just a movie that's been split into 4 parts. So I'm going to sort of treat this almost like a movie, even though... it is, a series. And so the pacing, because there's not really, like, each episode doesn't really have its own climax, it's just sort of a thing that progresses from the beginning to the end, and that's the whole thing. And so, the premise of this is that humans disappeared 1,000 years ago. And now, these robots are just sort of doing various tasks around in the world. The 2 robots come across a human baby. And they and there's like, okay, we're now going to raise this human baby. And that's the premise of from the trailers. That's how you think things are going to go. That's not really what happens. Well, okay, it does happen, but they sort of jump very quickly through raising of this child, who they end up naming Sarah. And she basically becomes a teenager in like 1 or 2 episodes. I don't remember, actually, because I did watch this a while ago. And I kind of wish that they actually spent longer raising Sarah. And again, this is why partly I think if you treat this as like one movie, then it makes sense that they did this in terms of the pacing for this. But as a show, it does feel kind of like, oh man, I wish they spent multiple episodes of her as like a young kid. I think that would have been fun. But they don't do that. So, okay. So there's that. And so instead, you have to look at the story that they do tell. The story that they do tell is ultimately a fairly simple story, but I think the emotions are actually still really good. In fact, this is like, I don't know, maybe I'm just weak, but I am like legitimately emotionally moved by this. So, I don't know. And also, the music especially helps with that. There's really good music with this. It works really well. And the animation, it's again, the 3D sort of style, kind of like Beastars. It's not as good as Beastars, but it does still work pretty well. It's definitely not, bad in terms of making it worse. So, I don't know. If you think of this as just sort of like one movie, and one with a simple story, but I think one that is actually really strong emotionally, I think you might actually like this a lot. I liked this a lot, like, really well. I was sort of, like, not really sure how I was going to feel about it, especially, like, kind of halfway through. But at the end of it, I was just like, damn, I actually really, really enjoyed this. So I'm actually going to give this a 9. I liked this a lot. Definitely recommend it. Again, it's a simple story, but it's one that I think you could really get into and appreciate the emotions for. Okay. Next, we have something that I did not finish. I started Mushoku Tensei. Now, Mushoku Tensei was sort of split into 2 parts. There was sort of the first half and the second half. The second half is currently airing. I believe actually the subbed version is done. It's just the dub is like 3 or 4 episodes in at this point. I have not watched the second part at all. Okay, so even though I could have started with the second part, I didn't do that. Oh yeah, by the way, I said this before last year, I'll say it again. I watched all my animes dubbed because I'm a filthy casual. Mostly it's because it's kind of hard for me to read subtitles. And unless I have a specific issue with the English voice acting, I don't really have a problem. So I watched all of this dubbed, and so even though I could have watched some of part 2 in dubbed, I haven't yet, so I'll be talking about part 2 next year. So what is the premise for Mushoku Tensei? It is an isekai. Now, I haven't really seen any other isekais, but I know the premise for this, and generally the critique about these mostly is that, it ends up just being sort of like, male power fantasy with, like, the male character having, like, a harem of women and stuff like that. So, now the thing is, at first it seems like they're going to do that. And they're going to lean heavily into it, because the main character, who gets, isekai is this like 30-year-old like loser creep who like plays hentai games on his computer all day and like even like didn't go to his mom's funeral and stuff like that. And then of course he ends up like getting hit by a car or whatever. So the trope for that. And he gets sort of almost like reincarnated into basically this like newborn kid in this fantasy setting, and this kid's name is Rudius, and he's part of this like kind of family that's like pretty well known, but is sort of like on the kind of outskirts of that family. Um, and it's explained in the show, but anyway. And so the thing with it is that like as a baby, like a very young child, he still, even though he has like I don't know how to explain it. It's sort of like he has the soul still that of his former soul, but like his mind is still that of like the young kid. So like he still is like a pervert. So he'll like for example, as like a little kid, he'll like grope like the maids or whatever and stuff like that. And it's like, and like at first like, okay, this is kind of weird. I'm like, why is this happening? But like the characters, like the maids, for example, like say something. They're like, hey, this is like not cool to like the parents, and they have this thing where like they're addressing the actual like kind of shitty, well, not kind of, the actual shitty behavior both of Rudius and also just sort of this sort of European medieval fantasy setting, because again, like there's a lot of gender roles and like misogyny that like happens in this world, and like it is shown in that framework. Now they don't really do much about it, they just sort of show it and say that like this is bad. Maybe they end up doing something about it later, but that is something where it's kind of like, okay, you're just kind of showing that things are shitty and not okay, but like what are you gonna do about it? So they're not really getting to that. Maybe they will, I don't know. But anyway, the show mostly at the beginning focuses on Rudius as he sort of grows up, right? And when he's like a young kid, because he still has sort of this like not really the mentality, but he kind of has these thoughts of like back when he was like a 30-year-old guy or whatever. So for example, he learns to read really quickly, and like he starts actually being able to do magic. And so his family, his parents, they get him like a trainer, and this trainer for magic is this girl named Roxy. And this is definitely a thing where it's like, okay, she's gonna start to the whole thing is that this is like the main girl that the guy is gonna get into. And of course, as a fucking weirdo, he starts like hitting on her in a super weird way, especially because he's like a young child. And she of course is like, stop, like it's like, boy, stop. And it's like, it's not great, honestly, the interaction with him and Roxy. It's fine. But it's just kind of standard where like he learns that he can talk to a girl without just like immediately drooling or whatever. And it's like, okay, it's fine. I don't know. Roxy's like kind of the most boring of like the main of the kind of important characters to me, honestly. But what later is that Rudius meets Sylphie, and Sylphie is interesting because Rudius thinks Sylphie's a guy, and because of that, he sort of treats her as like hey, I'm friends with you because you're a guy like me. Let's do stuff friends would. And then he learns that she's a girl, and he sort of has this moment of crisis where it's like, wait, but I was treating you as a friend like a guy, but you're a girl. And it's something that's like, it's dumb, because like obviously, of course, anyone can be friends with anyone, but like he doesn't know that. And so he has this kind of moment of realization that's like, oh, wait, I should treat you the same as I was treating you before, even though now I know you're a girl. It's like, so it's like, okay, again, it's not amazing, but it's like, it's something. So, okay. So that's decent. But then, what happens is, Rudius, as he grows into, again, being like, I think like almost 10 years old or whatever, he ends up being recruited by like the main Grey Rat family to basically now be a teacher for one of their daughters, this girl named Eris, who is just like a bitch. Like that's her whole thing, is just she's just a brat, and she's just cruel to everyone, and like nobody likes her, and even Rudius doesn't like her. He has this kind of thing where it's like, I think she's like, where she's like, yeah, she's hot, but like she's like, she sucks. So like and so there is some kind of growth between that where it's like she learns, he learns that like, why is she kind of a brat and stuff like that, and so they kind of grow with that. It's okay. There's some fucked up stuff with the family that happens. Like the dad literally like tries to get them to like hook up, and it's just like they're like kids, bro. So it's weird. But again, it shows it as it being weird. So there's that. I will say, there is also a character who is Ghislaine. And Ghislaine is maybe the hottest character who's ever been animated in anything ever. But her whole thing is that she's this like warrior that has, an amazing sword skill or whatever, but she has had no formal education. So she's not stupid, she just doesn't know things. And so she also becomes like, basically Rudius teaches her just like math. And it's like, this is actually kind of an interesting way of looking at things, because again, usually when you see like, the big dumb warrior person, they're just like, they are like a stupid person. And Ghislaine is not stupid, she just doesn't know things. And they actually, emphasize that. I think that's done decently well. And, so all this stuff is happening for several episodes, and it's like, okay, we're certainly kind of understanding the world and the character interactions and the build-up of things, and it's done decently well, but at this point, it's like, okay, can we actually get to a story? We're not really there yet. And then at the end of episode 8, all hell breaks loose. And it's like something happens that you don't really understand, and it's just this crazy, powerful dude just shows up and starts killing people, and you're like, what the fuck? What's going on? Like, oh my god. And it's like, okay, here the story's gonna get insane, here we go. And what happens in episode 9 is Rudius and Eris get stuck in a desert, and they wander around, and they find this dude who's, like, kind of an outcast, because people think he killed some people, and, like, maybe he did, but maybe he didn't, and, like, it's kind of interesting, I guess, but, like, I don't know, and there's this thing with, like, sort of like an adventurer guild, kind of like D&D, but, like, people are, like, underprepared to do things, and they get sort of, like, traumatized by stuff like that, which is kind of what I was hoping Attack on Titan would do, but, like, it's not bad, but, like, the investment of what was going on with that very end of episode 8 does not translate over to what happens afterwards. And it might be an issue, and then again, just like part 1 just stops. And it's like, okay, the pacing of that felt super weird. So maybe if you watch the whole thing, it won't feel weird, okay? I don't know, I've only seen part 1. But as of now, it does feel a little weird. And so I'm kind of hesitant to give this a ton of credit, because again, I've seen half of the one season that is this show, and so stuff is definitely not, finished yet. And depending on how they finish it, I could be disappointed, or I could end up actually really liking it. So for now, I am going to give it a 7. It's a high 7, pretty high, and this definitely could totally be an 8, as if they kind of do the ending even decently. But I am a little worried that they might drop the ball. I don't know yet. I will see when I continue on to part 2. I'll be talking about it next year and see if they continue and it actually is good. But for now, I'm going to give Mushoku Tensei Part 1 by itself a high 7. Okay. Also I should mention something also along with something that's happening right now is Agretsuko Season 4 came out like a couple weeks ago. I did not have time to watch it, so I will watch it and I'll talk about it next year. So yeah, that's the thing. Anyway, moving on. Here's an anime that's, I'm not sure when this actually came out, but it's at least not this last year, that I was not going to watch, never even heard of it before, but I saw so much praise for it, particularly the animation, that I'm like, alright, fine, I'll check it out, and that's Violet Evergarden. Now, here's the thing. The premise of this is that Violet, the character of Violet, is this sort of, like, emotionless kind of weapon, quote-unquote, and it's, like, not super clear if she's actually, like, a human or, like, some sort of, like, creation or something. Anyway, whatever. But the thing is that she's supposed to be, helping for fighting in this sort of war, but she stops doing that, and she basically becomes what can I only describe as, like, a letter carrier. So, like, or she, like, writes letters to people. She'll, like, transcribe a letter for someone, and then she'll deliver it to someone. And basically, the whole premise of this, and the whole hook for this, for me, is that Violet, as this sort of emotionless person, is delivering and dealing with these letters that are very very emotional, to these other characters. And so the whole premise of this that I would expect is you sort of see these characters and their very personal emotional struggles through the eyes of Violet. When the show does this, it's very good. Particularly episodes 9 and 10 are the best of those, where you have, those are really, really good. And some examples of things where this happens is you have, like, an author, I think it's a play author, who, because his daughter died, he kind of lost his inspiration, there's stuff like that. You have a character who, it's this, like, kind of princess kind of character who is getting married off to someone who she doesn't really like by her parents, and, like, it's stuff like that where it's like, you see these characters through the eyes of Violet, and that's done quite well. But that's only about a third of the show. The other third of the show is just about Violet as a person in this sort of job, and the other third is about sort of the world as a whole and whatever kind of war is going on in the background. And those two things I just don't care about. I don't think Violet is an interesting character. And the thing is, that's fine if you're trying to witness these other characters through her, but when that doesn't happen, you just have Violet, it's really boring. Like, I find it really boring. And since they spend so long, trying to, just going over Violet in this sort of letter carrier job, by the time they actually start to go into the overall war and what Violet's actual deal might be, I've completely lost interest in her character. I just don't give a shit anymore. And, I saw so many people saying that, like, the animation is so good, it's so beautiful, and, like, I mean, it's good, but I don't know, I didn't think it was anything that special, to be honest. I don't know, like, I don't know. It's not as good as I thought it would be, and overall I was kind of disappointed by this because of how much praise I saw for it. Again, those episodes sort of in the middle, again, particularly episodes 9 and 10, I think those are the best ones, are really good episodes, like 9 out of 10 quality episodes. But overall, I can't give it too much praise because I was bored a lot of the time. So, I don't know. I guess you get a 6. It's not very exciting, and like I could see other people not being bored by Violet, and therefore they could actually really like this show. But I wasn't bored by Violet, so I didn't really like this show. Again, overall positive, has some very good stuff in it, but overall quality, kind of meh. Now here's something kind of random. There's an X-Men anime. You might have not known that. In fact, there were like 4 Marvel animes that were made, like, again, sort of early 2010s. There's an Iron Man one, there's a Wolverine one, an X-Men one, and there's a Blade one. These are all supposed to be kind of part of the same universe or whatever. I just saw the X-Men one, and I don't really know much about X-Men. We saw like the 2000 movie, and like that's it. So, yeah. And my main thing about this show is it feels like this is the final season of a decent show. For example, the beginning of this show is about the aftermath of the Dark Phoenix incident, and I know vaguely about what that is. And like, okay, but like, why didn't we actually see the Dark Phoenix incident? Like, and like maybe that was actually part of the Wolverine show, but I don't think it was. I don't know, but like, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, I feel like how the emotions are played with these characters, like, oh, you should really care about these characters and really feel for what they're going through. And it's like, but I don't, because I just started dealing with them. So it's really weird. And, there's that. And again, the show is mostly focusing on, because again, there has this sort of aftermath of Dark Phoenix. It definitely is on Cyclops. Decent amount of stuff with Wolverine and Beast as well. Storm is here, but like, she does almost nothing, which sucks because Storm actually looks kind of fun, and she's actually, her design's great, but she doesn't really do anything, so there's that. And the art style is interesting. It's like super shadow heavy, which sort of makes it, kind of different for some stuff. But the animation itself is kind of not super great, in terms of the character movements and, the fight scenes and stuff. So again, it's like, I feel like I should like this based on, again, the emotions the characters are going through and sort of how it's presented, but because I don't know these characters, I don't feel that. So it's like, I should like this, but I kind of come away from it being like, it's fine. So, it's fine. It gets a 6. I don't know, maybe if I really already knew the X-Men characters well, or maybe if I watched the other Marvel anime things, I would like it more, but I don't really have much of a, care to. So, it's fine. 6 out of 10. I don't know. And last, speaking of Marvel animes, I watched Marvel Future Avengers. So the premise of this is, well, it is, again, a Marvel anime where you have, of course, like, the Avengers, which in this case it's, I believe, Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, Thor, Wasp, and I think I'm forgetting somebody. I don't know, whatever. And they end up kind of coming across these teenagers who sort of have their own powers, and I think they might be new characters for this show. And they sort of kind of take them in as sort of like apprentice characters or whatever. And that's kind of it. Like, there really isn't too much going on. Season 1 is, it's more sort of an episodic plot of these characters sort of dealing with the Avengers and with some various villains. While Season 2 is more episodic. It actually involves the Inhumans, which, it's fine. And I think that's the main thing. It's fine. The show is fine. The show definitely focuses a lot on, again, these teens who as characters are alright. There's really nothing that interesting about them. In Season 1, there is this sort of dynamic with the main character, I don't even remember his name, and this guy, I think, pretty sure his name was Bruno, which is okay. It's somewhat decent, but I don't know, it gets to the point where it's kind of like so over dramatic that it's kind of funny. So there's that. And one thing that is like pretty weird is that like the dialogue is not great. This might be something where, again, maybe the sub is better, but it does seem it's like definitely like kind of cheesy Saturday morning cartoon vibes. And like, for example, the superheroes, like, they like literally like yell out their attack names like they're Pokemon. It's just like, why are you doing this? It just feels weird. So I don't know, like, it's fine. The characters are all fine. There's nothing really terrible about it. Again, the teens in particular are pretty basic. I don't know, again, if I watched this as a kid growing up, like, I'd probably like it. And again, I just don't dislike it now, but it's fine, standard, whatever. 7 out of 10. I don't know. Not much of a note to go out on, really, but that was the order I had things in, so there we go. I'm kind of scared to look at how long this video is. Oh my god, it's 2.5 hours. Okay, I thought this one might be might be shorter than last year. I mean, it probably is. How much? Whatever. I should wrap this up. Hopefully you got something from this. Again, lots of 7s, lots of 8s. The best thing I can say about any of this, go watch Arcane. Definitely the best thing I saw this year, and honestly, it wasn't even that close. So go watch Arcane. In terms of stuff, again, they will be talking about for next year. Again, second part of Mushoku Tensei, Season 4 of Agretsuko, more of Owl House Season 2, more of Young Justice Season 4, and then just whatever other seasons and new stuff happens to come up, I'll check that out. Oh, there are at least, I know, let's see, I want to watch Centaur World, so that should be something that I get for next year. And there was no anime that I hate watched, like I did for Attack on Titan. This year, but I do have an idea of something that I probably might maybe watch next year that might fill a similar vein, so we'll see. But that's all I got for now. This has been almost 2 hours and 40 minutes on my end of constant talking. My throat is dry, I need water, and yeah. Oh boy. So, tomorrow, hopefully, if I can edit things in time, on the 31st, I will be putting out my top 15 favorite metal albums of the year, and then after that, the Sunday after that, we will be doing our show Sunday for January shitty TV show month, or more shitty anime month, and we'll be watching Vampire Night. So, I'll see you for that.